Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to this one-shot marathon. Today we are going to discuss one of the most complex topics under internal security. We will be covering the entire chapter of Northeast insurgency in one single session. Many students tell me that this topic is one of the most complex as far as internal security syllabus is concerned. So today, let's try to simplify this complicated topic so that this should become your one source, one stop solution for preparing for this important chapter. Because if you look at previous questions, a lot of questions have been asked from this particular section based on Northeast insurgency. So in this session today, I'll be breaking down the topics as given in the slide over here. First, we will discuss why Northeast of India is so prone to insurgent movements. This discussion alone can help you answer a mains question. Then we will look at each and every state in Northeast India. We will talk about different insurgencies that have plagued the region, starting with Naga insurgency, then insurgencies in the state of Assam. We will also discuss insurgency in Manipur, including the latest episode of ethnic violence, along with insurgencies seen in Mizoram, Tripura, and Meghalaya. Then finally, we will sum up everything and we will discuss the response of the Indian state to tackle the security threats in the Northeast. And finally, I will give you a list of PYQs, the previous year questions that have been asked in the mains exam, along with a number of practice questions so that you can practice your answer writing based on today's discussion. Trust me, this discussion would be immensely helpful, especially if you're preparing for the mains exam. Now, before we start, I have an important announcement. Unacademy has been providing a 3-day free trial of all the classes that are available on our platform. This trial period started on the 1st of October and it comes to an end tonight on the 3rd of October. So maybe after the session ends, if you still have time, you can watch all our classes, at least catch hold of maybe a couple of sessions. And this is absolutely free for everyone. And if you're looking to enroll for our program, the festive offer is still available at 24,999. You can get a 12-month subscription along with 1 month of free extension. So those interested, click on the link provided in the description and don't forget to enter the code IAS English to avail this special offer. So with this, let's get started. And before we start, can you please press the like button if you're liking our initiatives? So just stay with me for the next 3.5 hours. I promise this would be a very productive session. We will go in depth into the Northeast, understand the dynamics of the society in the Northeast, how it has contributed to the security situation, and what threat does it pose to India's security interests. So let's start with the first topic. Why is Northeast India so prone and so vulnerable to insurgent movements? Because since independence, Northeast India has been one region in the country which has suffered from persistent insurgencies. There have been at least 50 to 60 different armed groups that have led a war against the Indian state. Almost in every state in the Northeast, insurgencies have been witnessed. So, what explains this phenomena? How come every Northeastern state has suffered from the deadly insurgent movements? What has been its impact on India's national security? What is the current status? So, first, we need to address this question: why is this region so prone and so vulnerable? This itself can come as a mains question. UPSC might ask you a 15 marks question, asking you to explain those factors that are responsible, which has led to these insurgent movements in the northeast of India. So let's have a very structured discussion, a very analytical discussion. The first important factor is the ethnic profile of the region. I want you to concentrate on the geography and demography of Northeast India. Because the answer to this question lies in the geography and demography of Northeast India. The geography and demography of the place will explain those factors which are responsible for making the region vulnerable for insurgencies. And the first factor is the ethnic profile, the social profile of the region. I'm sure all of you are aware of the demography of the Northeast region. Northeast India is home to several ethnic indigenous tribes. And indigenous tribal communities are very guarded about their land, their resources, their identity, their culture, and their language. So, whenever they see a threat from outsiders, it results in a very strong response by the native ethnic tribal groups. And the fight over resources and land and culture also results in inter-tribal conflicts. This is very common in regions across the world wherever you find indigenous native communities to be inhabiting the territory. As I told you, indigenous groups are very guarded about their land, which is essentially uh, absolutely essential for their survival, for their livelihood. They are closely connected with the land, with the forests. They even worship the forest and the nature around them. They draw their sustenance from the environment around them. They're very protective of their language, their culture, their identity is connected to these factors. So, this results in a clash of interests between different ethnic groups, between different tribal communities, or between a tribal community and an outside community, which is not native to the region. So, when the groups perceive a threat, even if it's not a real threat, a perception of the threat is enough to invite a stronger response, and usually it would be a violent response. Native indigenous tribes, most of them are known to be martial tribes, known for their war fighting skills, their jungle fighting, jungle warfare fighting skills. So, usually, this resistance turns violent very quickly. The fight for land, the fight for identity and resources and cultural rights. This quickly acquires a violent turn, and this has been one of the prime reasons responsible for so many insurgencies in northeast India. Now, for example, look at Assam. In Assam, the native majority group would be the Assamese, who have been dominant since the days of the Ahom kingdom. Whereas other smaller tribes, especially forest and hill dwelling tribes, they have felt threatened under the domination of the Assamese. For example, the Bodos, the Karbi Anglong community, the Dima Hasao community as well, the Nagas, the Mizos, all these smaller tribal groups and ethnic communities, they feel threatened by a more dominant clan. The Nagas themselves have been quite dominant in this region, spread on both sides of the border present here, both in India and in Myanmar. So, between these larger groups and smaller groups, there is a history of conflict, clashes, and violence, which translates into current day tensions as well. Take the latest episode of violence between the Meiteis and the Kukis, or the violent clashes seen in Manipur in the 1990s between Nagas and Kukis. So, the tribal root causes are inherently responsible for some of the insurgent movements that we have seen in this region. I'm not saying this is the only reason. This is one of the factors related to the geography and demography of the place, which makes the region so prone to so many insurgent movements. The question of tribal identity and the ethnic profile of this region has been one of the important factors which has contributed to this. Then, apart from that, the geographical isolation of the region, the disconnect of Northeast India from rest of the country. First of all, look at the map here. You will notice that Northeast India is landlocked. It is cut off from direct access to the mainland. It is cut off from direct access to the sea. It is connected to the rest of the country through the narrow Siliguri corridor, which is the only connection between mainland India and Northeast India. The Siliguri corridor happens to be a strategic choke point located over here, hardly 22 kilometers wide, sandwiched between Nepal on one side, Bangladesh on the other side. And once you cross Siliguri, you enter the Darjeeling belt and then the Brahmaputra valley. Over here, the terrain, the topography is very complex. As a result, connectivity and accessing the region is difficult, which in turn hampers economic development. And over the decades, since New Delhi, the capital, was located far away from Northeast India, the geographical isolation played a role in the apathy that was shown by the Indian state towards the development of Northeast India. So there is a sense of neglect, a sense of apathy, which has been felt by the people of Northeast India as far as the Indian state is concerned. As far as the government of India is concerned, the reach of the government, the reach of administration and development is concerned, the people of Northeast India, they have felt isolated in general because of the geography of the place, the lack of access, the remoteness of the region, the difficulty in establishing connectivity, and the political apathy and neglect has created this resentment, which has contributed to anger against the Indian state. This is in turn connected to the lack of development that you see here, the lack of good infrastructure, the lack of adequate connectivity, the lack of job opportunities. Because when there is no development in a region, the lack of development creates a fertile ground for breeding extremism and radicalism. There is a direct connection between the two. In fact, in internal security, the very first chapter is to study the linkages between development and extremism. And they share an inverse relationship. When there is no development, you will see that radicalism, extremism will flourish in those areas. And vice versa is also true. One way to tackle extremism and radicalism is to provide for better development in that region. So, over the last 70 odd years, the distance and the isolation of the region, the remoteness and the lack of connectivity, and the political neglect and apathy has led to lack of development, lack of infrastructure, lack of adequate jobs, lack of welfare. So this adds to the resentment factor and creates that sense of anger against the Indian state. And also don't forget the distinctiveness that you see amongst the communities over here. During independence in 1947 and following India's independence, when the Indian Union was being created, some of the regions over here and the tribes and the groups, they felt that they were being forced to merge with the Indian Union. Though they were culturally distinct, historically disconnected from rest of the country, and though they had appealed to the British to grant them independence, to maintain their autonomy, and to protect their land and rights, the eventual merger of the territory with India, with the Indian Union, was seen as a forceful merger, creating a perception of anger and resentment against the Indian state. Take, for example, Naga insurgency, or the Mizo insurgency, or the insurgency led by the Metis in 1960s. One of the root cause was the resentment left behind since 1947 and post independence, where the territories over here, the groups present here, felt that they were being forced by India to merge with the rest of the country. So, this they felt was a threat to their land and their rights. And that resentment, that anger has played a role and it has contributed to the insurgencies in this region. So, the geographical isolation, the lack of development, and the political disconnect has been a very important factor, which is something you need to note down. Next, the third point, very, very important, the difficult terrain and topography of this region. If you look at Northeast India, if you have ever visited this region, you would have noticed that the terrain here is hilly and mountainous, densely forested. The territory is cut through across multiple rivers, wetlands. So it's a very complex geography which is present here. So it's not easy to provide for development through large public projects. First of all, access has been difficult, mobility has been difficult, and upon that, moving large machinery and equipment to set up large public projects has been a big challenge because of the difficult terrain and topography of this region. The hilly mountainous areas, be it towards the Himalayas or towards the Myanmar border, towards the Bangladeshi border, across this frontier, you have hilly mountainous terrain, you have dense forests and jungles, fast flowing rivers like Brahmaputra, which is known to flood during every monsoon. Then you have Barak, the Feni, Tista, multiple rivers cutting across. And this complex topography hampers development. It not only hampers development, it also creates a perfect safe haven for the insurgents to hide from the security forces. The local communities, which are well versed with the topography and the terrain, They can use the forests and the mountains to take cover, to camouflage themselves, and to hide themselves from the security forces and their reach, which allows them to operate with impunity against the state. So, geographical factors such as these, they are pivotal when it comes to the security landscape of any region in the world. This factor has been a crucial factor when it comes to the multiple insurgencies that we have seen in Northeast India. Next, the porous international borders that we have and the prevalence of organized crime, the transnational organized mafia that has flourished in this region, has been a major contributing factor. Now, for example, look at the India Myanmar border, or look at India's borders with then East Pakistan, which is today's Bangladesh. If you're aware of these two borders, you will know that the topography here is very complex, which I just explained. Hilly and mountainous, forested, the areas are remote, not well connected, it's not easy to move around. It's not easy for your border guarding forces as well to deploy to the border areas. So the border regions are highly porous, meaning there are natural gaps in the border. You can't literally fence each and every inch of the border, though attempts have been made. Physically fencing the entire boundary has proven challenging and even almost impossible. So the border remains highly porous. There are several natural gaps in the border which can be exploited by organized criminal elements. The criminal cartels, the transnational crime mafias which operate, they engage in drug trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, etc. Right next to the India Myanmar border, there is a hub for organized criminal activities, one of the global hubs for narcotics production and trafficking, known as the Golden Triangle region. I'm sure many of you would have heard about the Golden Triangle. It's a region that covers three Southeast Asian countries. It covers Myanmar, Thailand, and Lao PDR. Of late, the criminal activities and the presence of these criminal mafias has extended into Cambodia as well. These countries in Southeast Asia, which are present right at India's doorstep, because see, Myanmar is the gateway. Myanmar is what will connect India with the rest of Southeast Asia. Now, these borders are very porous. It's easy to move across the border without checks, without getting caught. And right next to India's borders, there exists a hub of drug trafficking and other criminal activities. Of late, you might have heard about the cyber scam centers in Cambodia, the cyber fraud criminal networks that operate in Cambodia and in Myanmar, which are eventually owned by Chinese mafia. There are Chinese criminals who have established the network of transnational criminal operators, the various scam calls and messages that you get, which are designed to defraud the Indian public of their hard earned money. These scams are primarily being perpetrated by the scam compounds situated in Cambodia, Myanmar, etc. This region has been a hotbed of animal hunting and poaching and wildlife trafficking because there is a huge black market for animal products. Superstitious belief in Asian traditional medicine, Chinese medicine, that few animal products have healing properties. So, for example, uh, the skin of the tiger, the teeth and the nails of a tiger, the tusk of an elephant, the horn of a rhinoceros, they're all prized, valuable assets. So, hunting and poaching, which takes place across this region, including in India, feeds this black market of wildlife trafficking. There is a free flow of drugs and money. There is opium cultivation, and a lot of synthetic drugs are also produced, from cocaine to meth and other notorious drugs are widely produced and trafficked in this region. There are gambling casino centers in Myanmar, especially, which are operated and run by Chinese mafia. So there's an entire nexus, an entire ecosystem of organized criminal networks right on India's doorstep. In fact, we have a similar organized criminal ecosystem on the western borders of India towards Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is known as the Golden Crescent. So, in that regard, India is blessed with a very unfortunate geography. On both sides of our country, towards the western and eastern frontiers, we have two major global hubs of narcotics production and criminal activities. The Golden Crescent towards the west, towards Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, and Golden Triangle towards the east, from Myanmar to Thailand to Cambodia and Laos. So, the presence of such criminal networks basically enables the free flow of drugs, money, and weapons. Now, don't you think these are the ingredients needed for insurgent groups and terrorist organizations? Please understand this point. Wherever organized crime flourishes, wherever organized crime is seen to be flourishing, the region would be a hub for money laundering as well. Money laundering is the illegal process through which black money is converted into white. Illegally acquired wealth through illegal activities is converted into legal wealth. So, money laundering flourishes in a region where organized crime is flourishing. So, when there is a free flow of drugs, arms, and money, this can easily fund terrorist and insurgent groups and their activities. So, there exists a direct connection between these three. Direct connection, a triangular connection between organized crime, terror and insurgent financing, and money laundering. In fact, some of the terrorist organizations and insurgent groups, they directly get involved in criminal activities to generate money to fund their terror activities. They even resort to extortion and kidnapping, which is a main source of generating revenue to fund their terrorist activities. They can easily source weapons. They can traffic drugs for drug mafias for a commission. And don't forget, terrorist and insurgent groups and radical groups, they rely on drug addiction to brainwash the youth, to recruit new cadres and brainwash them. Because once a target is essentially addicted to drugs, let's say a youth in that region who's been targeted for recruitment, he's addicted to drugs, he loses his mental capacity to think. The lines between what's ethical and not ethical blurs for that individual. It's easy to brainwash such an individual with a radical ideology, to enlist them and use them as mindless machines in this war of terrorism. So we have seen this with Pakistan sponsored terror groups as well, with Khalistani outfits, and we see this with Northeast insurgent groups as well. They essentially get the youth addicted to drugs. There is a massive drug problem in Northeast India. Plus, on the other hand, you have lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, which is pushing the youth towards anxiety, depression, making them more vulnerable to fall for drug addiction. And it makes them the perfect candidate, the perfect target for these radical groups to recruit them, to further get them addicted to drugs and brainwash them. And it's easier to get the task done. So there is that connection that exists between insurgency, terrorism, organized criminal activities, and money laundering. So it will not only fetch revenue for funding these activities, it will actually help them to source the raw materials that are needed to get hold of advanced weaponry, from grenades to rocket propelled launchers to advanced rifles and assault rifles to advanced communication kits and drones. They're all accessible in such a region where criminal activities are flourishing, where money is freely flowing. So they will be able to get hold of the latest weapons and technology, get hold of the money supply, and they in fact play a role in furthering the criminal activities. Insurgent groups like NSCN, ULFA, they have been involved in drug trafficking, drug smuggling, in arms smuggling. They get a cut out of it, they get a commission out of it, right? So there is this nexus that exists over here, and the presence of Golden Triangle on India's doorstep has been a major concern for India. The porous nature of the border, the ease with which insurgents and criminals can basically move across countries and enable these activities presents one of the biggest security challenges for India. So these external problems will inevitably spill over into India because of the porous nature of the border. That's why border security, border management is of utmost importance. Next, the other important reason, the presence of hostile countries in our neighborhood and the safe havens they have provided for these insurgents and terrorist groups. Now, take for example how Bangladesh, Myanmar, both these countries have emerged as safe havens for anti India insurgents and terrorists who are backed either by Pakistan or by China. Indian intelligence agencies have credible proof to establish these links. the links between state and non-state actors. Pakistani state actors, such as its intelligence agency ISI, is known to have funded Northeast insurgent groups via Bangladesh, via East Pakistan. When Bangladesh had a hostile regime which was anti India and pro Pakistan, for example, from 1970s to 1990s to early 2000. Then, right now, again under Muhammad Yunus, and when it was still East Pakistan before 1971, India has seen several instances where Pakistan has tried to use this region to destabilize India, to target India's northeast, to exploit India's internal social divisions. Starting with the Mizoram Naga insurgency, Pakistan was actively involved via East Pakistan, giving them shelter and supplying them arms and giving them training. There was active state support for these non state actors. We have seen the same with Myanmar, where China has been playing that role. Chinese intelligence, the Ministry of State Security, especially after the 1962 war with India. Following the conflict, China was actively involved in this covert war, a proxy war, where it has cultivated Myanmar as a base for these Northeast insurgent groups. China is known to have funded insurgent organizations like ULFA, NSCN, and many others, using Myanmar as a base. So, the covert proxy warfare of our hostile neighbors has been another important factor, where Pakistani and Chinese state actors have been using non state entities via Bangladesh and Myanmar to target India, to use it as a safe haven, a terror sanctuary, to shelter these anti India insurgent organizations, protect their leadership, to give them drugs, funds, and weapons and training so that they can act against India. So these factors, they have played the primary role in the continued instability of Northeast India. Now, if there is a mains question on this, I hope all of you can summarize these points and write a well structured answer. So, to help you out, I'm summarizing the points in this particular slide. Whatever we have discussed, it is summarized into these four common factors: the general apathy, alienation that people of Northeast India have felt from rest of the country, the cultural distinctiveness, the perception of a forced merger with India, and also don't forget the racial discrimination that people of Northeast India have faced from rest of the country. Tell me if I'm wrong, even today, be it in Delhi, in Bengaluru, Mumbai, or Chennai, where youth from Northeast India come for studies, come for work opportunities, don't you think they face a lot of racial discrimination based on how they look? They're called names, they are not given houses for rent. They find it very difficult to survive in other parts of the country, though they're contributing to the economy of the other cities. The constant racial discrimination they have faced creates that distinct feeling, and obviously it fuels the sentiment of resentment and anger. Also, look at the representation that Northeast India has been given in general. You take our media outlets, for example, be it our newspapers, especially our electronic news channels. How much prime time coverage do they give for developments in Northeast India? Even when Manipur was burning, when there were devastating floods in Brahmaputra, how much attention did they pay towards these issues in Northeast India? Now compare that with one small incident in Delhi or Mumbai that would be headlines for days together. Look at the political representation. Look at, even in general, in aspect of, let's say, popular culture, right? Look at how much attention our movies have paid to issues of the Northeast region, right? You can count the number of movies which have covered issues from Northeast India. These factors play a role eventually. It creates a division between the people. They feel that they don't belong. They feel that they don't connect with rest of the nation. Because historically, culturally, there has been a sense of disconnect. There has been a perceived sense of resentment and anger when the region was perceivedly, forcefully merged with rest of the country. And now racial discrimination and the neglect and apathy and the alienation has continued. So this is one key factor which you have to stress upon. This is a genuine root cause. You can't dismiss this resentment. This happens to be one of the genuine root causes which has triggered so many insurgencies. Then the question of tribal rights, the question of tribal culture, tribal identity, the threat posed by outsiders, the inter-tribal, inter-ethnic rivalries and clashes, the domination of one larger group on smaller minority groups. These have been persistent issues. So this is something you can discuss and mention. You have to talk about the challenge created by illegal migration, the rampant illegal migration from Bangladesh and from Myanmar as well. This has been seen as a threat by the native tribal groups and ethnic groups. They see the outsiders as a threat for their land, their resources, their opportunities, their culture, their language, and their identity. And the governments have failed to check these influx of refugees and later illegal migrants. So this has been a contributing factor because this results in changes in demography. It results in socio-ethnic problems, turning into tensions between different communities. Then finally, we have the cross-border factors and the criminal nexus that is prevalent over here. The porous border, the complex geography and the isolation, the lack of development, the hostile neighbors. So you can sum up all these into 4 to 5 points, give relevant examples, and build a very good answer for this particular topic. So all the points you need, I have presented them in 2 slides over here. You can take a look at this later. Whatever we have discussed, I have given it point wise for your reference so that it's easy for you to take a screenshot and make notes out of it. All the points that we discussed, they are present in these 2 slides. So please go through this later and be prepared for a possible question on this topic. So as I said, once you cover these topics with me in this marathon, you don't need anything else. Once we go into each state and each insurgency, I will cover the current affairs, the latest developments as well. So it will be one source, one stop solution for you for the chapter on Northeast insurgency. Now, why don't we take a prelims practice question? There's a possibility of a prelims question also being asked. So let's test your knowledge. Arrange the following insurgencies in Northeast India in the chronological order of their occurrence. First, we have insurgency in Meghalaya, then Naga insurgency, Mizo insurgency, and Ulfa's insurgency in Assam. These are the 4 insurgent movements listed. Now, can you arrange them in the chronological order of their occurrence as to when they broke out, in which year, in which decade? So, based on that, can you arrange the right chronological sequence? Let's see how many of you can get this right. Take a few seconds, try to guess or try to make a calculated guess based on what you know, and then I will give you the right answer. I'll give you the explanation as well. But can someone tell me what could be the right answer here? See, there is one trick. If you can remember the first insurgency to break out in Northeast India and the last insurgency to break out, then your task will become easier. Very good. Dheeraj, Sanam, Ilyas Ansari, Sonika, Megha, Jagannathan, they've all given the right answer. Very good. The right answer is option B, 2341. The first insurgency that India dealt with post independence is Naga insurgency. In fact, to be precise, Naga insurgency had broken out even before India's independence. Right before August 15, 1947, Naga insurgents had declared a rebellion against the Indian state, making it India's first insurgency post independence. Then comes insurgency in Mizoram in 1960s. We also saw insurgency in Manipur in 1960s parallelly. So Mizoram, Manipur would be next. Then comes Assam and Tripura in 1970s. In Assam and Tripura, we saw the breakout of insurgencies in 1970s, from 1970s onwards. And the last would be Meghalaya. Meghalaya saw insurgency in the 1980s. This is the right chronological sequence. Understood? So 2341 is absolutely right. B is the right answer. So take a look at the chronology over here. Nagaland started out in 1947, the Naga insurgency, and it really picked momentum in 1950s. In 1960s, we saw Mizo insurgency first and then insurgency in Manipur. Tripura, Assam in 1970s, Meghalaya in the 80s. So one state has been largely free from any native insurgency, that is Arunachal Pradesh. Though Arunachal Pradesh is affected by these insurgent movements, it has not witnessed any local insurgency of its own. Yeah? The other insurgents have used Arunachal Pradesh. They have used Arunachal Pradesh as a safe haven to hide for logistics, for supply of arms and weapons and drugs, or to cross over into Myanmar or into China. But Arunachal Pradesh does not have any local insurgency of its own. So, in this context, we are not considering Sikkim, right? Though Sikkim is also considered as part of Northeast India, we are not considering that in this context. We are keeping it specific to these northeastern states. So Arunachal Pradesh has faced the brunt. It has been affected. The violence has spilled over. Insurgents have hidden in Arunachal Pradesh. They have created logistical support for themselves. They have crossed over into China and Myanmar via Arunachal Pradesh. But Arunachal itself does not have any local insurgencies per se. So these are the states affected, and this is the chronological sequence. So please remember this. Now, can you take up a mains practice question? Northeast India has been very vulnerable to insurgent movements. Examine the factors that have contributed to this security challenge with examples. So, this is what we have studied over the last 35 minutes. I have given you point wise explanation. For this answer, if possible, draw the map, rough map of Northeast India, so you can easily list out each factor, especially the geography based and demography based factors, right? You can start out with an introduction talking about the distinctiveness of Northeast India. In the body, list out each factor one by one, 5 to 6 points with examples, and then conclude why this region has been prone to so many insurgent movements. So, with this, we have completed topic number one. I hope all of you have followed until now and understood the points that we have discussed. As I said, it will not just be a factual discussion, right? It will be an analytical discussion to help you build your viewpoints on this complex topic. Now, let's look at each insurgency separately, at least the prominent ones. As I told you, the region has witnessed more than 50, 60 insurgencies. So it's not practical to sit and study all of them. UPSC will not expect you to go through each and every insurgency. It's not required. But based on my experience of teaching for the last 11 years, based on the type of questions that have been asked, and the most prominent movements which have affected India's security, we can choose some of the most important topics. So let's go state by state. Let's start with Naga insurgency, the first ever insurgency that the country dealt with post independence. Then we will move to Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, Tripura, and Meghalaya and cover all the important insurgencies. So if you're ready, we can begin with Naga insurgency first. There's a very interesting story, very interesting history behind Naga insurgency. The Nagas are a very large ethnic clan or ethnic group. The Nagas are not tribal per se, though they have scheduled tribe status, the scheduled hill tribe status in some states where they are in minority. But across this region, the Nagas are a very part of a very large ethnic clan that is widely distributed across this region. So Nagas are not just found in today's Nagaland, primarily the Naga Hills, which is part of Nagaland. It spills over into Assam and as well as into Manipur. But they're not only found here, they're found in other states as well. The Naga groups can be found in Assam, in Manipur, in Mizoram, in parts of Arunachal Pradesh, which previously was the Northeast Frontier Administrative Territory, the NEFA. And there are Naga subgroups found in the neighboring country as well, found here in Myanmar, which was previously Burma. Because don't forget the Treaty of Yandabu, right, which was drawn by the British after the British colonized Burma as well, following the Anglo Burmese Wars. They essentially divided this region and drew the boundary, the India Burma boundary, between their two colonies, between British India and British Burma. This divided the communities, divided the region and the land and the territories over here. And the lasting impact of this can be felt even today. In fact, the crisis in Manipur is in many ways related to the Treaty of Yandabu and the random boundary that the British drew over here without consulting the local tribes and the ethnic groups. The drawing of such boundaries have divided people for centuries. It has left behind lasting social and economic impact. And this is connected to the insurgencies that you see here. So Nagas who reside in this region, in the Naga hills of today's Nagaland, in the neighboring states of Assam, Arunachal, Manipur, and Mizoram, also in the neighboring country of Myanmar. Collectively, they are part of the Naga clan, a large ethnic group consisting of subgroups of Nagas. Now, there is something very distinct about the Naga ethnic community. The Nagas are known for their martial skills. The Nagas have been a war fighting race, a head hunting race. You know who's a head hunter? In tribal communities, this is quite common. Tribal communities, which are very guarded about their land and culture and resources, they often take vengeance against rival tribes by cutting off the head of their rivals and getting the head as a bounty, as a memento. They are the head collecting tribes, the head hunter tribes, quite literally. The Nagas have been one such head hunting tribe known for their war fighting skills. They know the jungle, they know the terrain very well. They are masters of deception, masters of jungle warfare. So, this martial skill of the Nagas was noticed by the British. The British were very smart, very shrewd when it came to Northeast India. Though the British colonized the whole of the Indian subcontinent, they were very cautious and careful when it came to the tribal belt of Northeast India. From the Northeast region, they wanted the resources of Northeast India, the forest resources primarily. That was their primary objective. They wanted the forest resources and they wanted connectivity to their colony in Burma. This was their top focus and priority. They had no interest in governing the people and the territory. They knew tribal politics can be complex. They understood that tribal demands would be very challenging to manage, and tribal communities will quickly rebel and fight back, and it would be very hard for the British to contain. So, they adopted a hands off approach towards this region. They would give some limited autonomy to the local chieftains and the princely states and kingdoms. For example, the Methi kingdom, the Methi Hindu kingdom, was granted limited autonomy. The British never annexed Manipur entirely into British India, right? So such autonomy would be given, and they would bring in forest laws in the name of environment protection. And their true interest was to get hold of the resources of the region, to loot the forest wealth, to loot the resources, and have good connectivity towards Myanmar, that is Burma, and Southeast Asia. So they secured these interests, these rights, in return for autonomy to the tribes and the ethnic groups without forcing them or without pushing them to merge with British India. They knew how to maintain that distance. So this again has been a factor. The way in which British had granted a degree of autonomy and they were only focused on accessing the resources and the region. This played a role in maintaining that sense of distinctiveness and separation between Northeast India and rest of the country, rest of the Indian subcontinent. They had even made promises. They had made commitments to some of the local tribes and ethnic groups that if we leave the subcontinent, you will be given independence. We will not force you to merge with India. Such commitments were also made by the British. During World War One, this story of Naga insurgency goes back to World War One. During World War One, when Britain was fighting against the other Axis powers, right, Germany and the others, the Ottoman Turks, etc., Britain needed a steady line of supply of soldiers, war fighting material, ration, etc. And it was primarily India which funded and fueled the war efforts of the British, not just during World War One, but more so during World War Two. So during World War One, the British, who had spotted the fighting skills, the jungle warfare skills of the Nagas, they decided to further train them, fine tune their skills, and recruit them, and use the services of Nagas in the British war efforts. So these Naga soldiers, they were given special force like training. The British essentially gave them special forces kind of training. The Naga war fighting skills, which were tapped by the British during World War One, They had recognized the war fighting skills of the Nagas, and they essentially recruited them, trained them, fine tuned their war fighting skills, and turned them into a special force commando unit. These Naga soldiers, Naga commandos, they fought for the British Indian Army. They fought for British India. They fought for the British war efforts across the world. So these Naga soldiers who came back victorious, who came back to the region after the end of World War One, they came back with wartime knowledge. Because please remember, war teaches you a lot of things. It gives you a different exposure. Imagine in that era, in the early 1900s, the local ethnic groups and tribes here had no worldly exposure. They had not really seen the rest of the world. So when a group of Naga soldiers who were trained by the British, recruited by the British, fought in battlefields across the world against foreign enemies, when they came back, they came equipped with the wartime knowledge. They had learnt about the political developments and social developments in other countries. They realized how nation states are being formed, how nationalism is used to create an identity based on ethnicity, based on linguistic homogeneity. So those Naga soldiers would go on to establish a club, the Naga Club. Through the Naga Club, these Naga soldiers started politically organizing the Naga community. Because see, in the Indian subcontinent by 1920s, 1930s, our freedom struggle was gaining momentum. It was becoming very clear that British rule is going to end sometime soon and India would be granted independence. So Nagas were very certain, very clear that they should not be forced to merge with India because according to them, according to the then Naga leaders, they had nothing to do with rest of India. Historically, culturally, they were distinct. They wanted to maintain that distinctiveness. They wanted to bring all the Naga inhabited territories in India and Burma together to form a greater Nagaland, a land of the Nagas. They had expressed this desire to the British as well. So the members of Naga Club, which mainly comprised of former soldiers and special force commandos who had fought in World War One for the British, they came back with this wartime knowledge. They understood how nation states are formed. They understood the concept of nationalism, how national identity is built on ethnic lines. They saw in Europe that one ethnic group has a separate nation for themselves, one linguistic group has a separate nation for themselves. So they felt, why shouldn't Nagas have a separate country for themselves? And they had expressed this political demand, and the British, in a way, had agreed to this because it was a quid pro quo. The British needed the services of the Naga soldiers during the war efforts, so they were basically promising them whatever was required, making these commitments. Whether they will fulfill this or not wouldn't matter, but they were encouraging the sentiments, giving them hope that in the future, when India is given independence, Naga areas will not be part of India. Such promises and commitments were being made repeatedly, and this was done again during World War II. Naga soldiers were heavily used by British during the Second World War against the Axis powers. This time again, Naga soldiers played a pivotal role on behalf of the British Indian Army, and they had even expressed their demand to the Simon Commission. You know, the Simon Commission, which visited India after a decade of the Government of India Act 1919, after the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, to evaluate its review and functioning. So when the Simon Commission arrived in 1928-29, members of Naga Club had met the Simon Commission expressing the demand that Naga territory should not be merged with India when India is granted independence. The British, in a way, had tacitly agreed to it. Though they had not given a final commitment through an agreement, but they still had given a tacit approval to this demand, encouraging the political sentiments. Now, until this point, the demand of Nagas was understandable because such demands existed across the country, across the subcontinent, in almost every princely state, in every nook and corner of the country, based on such identity lines, such demands existed. So the demand of Nagas was nothing unique. The British kept on encouraging such sentiments just because they needed their support during the war efforts. Now, the Naga Club transformed itself into the Naga National Council after the Second World War. post World War II, by 1946-47, Naga National Council was set up. It was an upgraded version of the Naga Club, which had been formed earlier. The Naga National Council now became the political representative of the Naga community. So by then, the British influence had weakened. The world wars had destroyed Britain's economy itself. Britain was a power on the decline. It was eventually pushed to leave all the colonies, granting independence. So decolonization was gaining momentum. It was only a matter of time before India could become independent. So when Naga National Council raised the demand with the British regarding Naga independence, Naga sovereignty, the British had in a way given a tacit approval for this as well. So eventually, when India was granted independence in 1947 and when the subcontinent was partitioned, the Naga National Council rejected any possible merger with India. In fact, the then leaders of Indian National Congress had made an attempt to talk and negotiate with the Naga leaders of NNC. The then governor, Sir Akbar Haidari, who was the governor of Assam at that point, who was the British representative at that point, had negotiated a 9-point agreement with the NNC leaders to accept India's sovereignty in return for constitutionally guaranteed autonomy. To keep this territory as a part of India, a deal had been struck between the British, the then governor of Assam, Akbar Haidari. The negotiations involved Indian representatives from the Indian National Congress and the NNC members and leaders, the Naga leaders essentially. The moderate faction of NNC had agreed for this compromise because Indian leaders were very clear that this demand cannot be met because this would create a wrong precedent. There were similar demands from every nook and corner of the country. If Naga demands were accepted, then there would be a big call for independence and sovereignty, which would destroy the Indian Union even before it could be formed. This was a credible threat for the very unity of a new nation. So, right before independence, the Akbar Haidari Agreement was finalized, through which the moderate Naga leaders were convinced that look, sovereignty can't be given, independence is out of the question, but if you merge with India, autonomy would be granted, constitutional autonomy with constitutional protection would be provided. This convinced the moderate Naga leaders, they accepted the deal, and India was hoping that everything would work out. But right before independence, some of the radical extremist Naga leaders, they broke from the accord, from the 9-point agreement. They rejected the deal with the Indian state and they declared a war against India. This is the start of Naga insurgency right before India's independence. The NNC, which was now split between the moderates and the extremist radical faction, right? The radical elements declared a war against the Indian state, the newly independent Indian state, declaring the start of Naga insurgency. Very quickly, they would organize themselves. They would be able to access funds and weapons, especially from Pakistan via East Pakistan. And they set up base in East Pakistan to target India. And 1950s became a brutal decade in the Northeast. Because please remember, at that point, Nagaland was not a separate state. Most of the Naga areas were part of the larger state of Assam, right? States like Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur were created much later. While Manipur was a Part C state for some time, then became a union territory, states like Mizoram that you have today, Nagaland, they were all part of Assam itself. So Naga identity was being threatened according to the Naga leaders. They were not happy with the autonomy which was being promised. They wanted outright independence and sovereignty. They wanted to realize the dream of a greater Nagaland, bringing all Naga areas together. So they rejected the Akbar Haidari Agreement and quit the accord and started the Naga insurgency. This was one of the first major security challenges for an independent India, the then Nehru government had to deal with. So, following this, the government had to tackle the insurgency, had to deal with this as a security problem. Within few years, the government of India decided to bring back a very controversial law, a British era law known as AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The AFSPA was enacted by the then British regime mainly to deal with the Quit India movement. It would give extraordinary powers to the police and security forces in an area which is declared as a disturbed area. So it was primarily used to target our freedom movement. It would give the forces the right to arrest, the right to destroy property, collect evidence without a warrant, even shoot at sight with the intention of killing on the mere suspicion, without a warrant, without further consequences and investigations. Such blatant immunity and protection was given to police and security forces mainly to crush our freedom struggle. It was used again during partition to contain the large scale communal violence which had spread across the country between Hindus and Muslims. But post independence, India had decided not to carry forward this law, not to inherit this controversial law. But given the situation in northeast India, in Assam, in the Naga belt, where insurgency was raging with outside support from East Pakistan, it became essential for the Nehru government to bring in AFSPA. So, the first instance where India brought AFSPA back post partition, post independence, is to deal with Naga insurgency. So, it was in the state of Assam that AFSPA was brought back to contain Naga insurgency. The Indian Army and Assam Rifles, they were given the lead role for counterinsurgency operations against the Naga insurgents. So, for nearly 15 to 20 years, the threat continued, especially because of the support from East Pakistan, where Pakistan was using East Pakistan to supply the arms and support weapons and the funds and the training by establishing bases for these insurgents in East Pakistan. So, this is what created a new threat, a covert proxy threat for India. So, much before Pakistan meddled with India in Punjab, in Kashmir, and sponsored terrorism against India, one of the first instances of Pakistani covert proxy war against India was in the northeast by backing the Naga insurgency via East Pakistan. That's why the liberation of Bangladesh was a key milestone in this regard. When India backed the Awami League and the Mukti Bahini, and we covertly supported the liberation of Bangladesh and fought a war eventually against Pakistan, liberating Bangladesh. It was a big win for India because these insurgents lost their support bases and safe havens overnight. The Naga insurgents lost the support bases. The NNC was now exposed to Indian security forces. So this forced NNC to enter into talks with India again, and the Shillong Accord was worked out in 1975. Because we had a friendly government in Bangladesh under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was cooperating with India to deal with the security challenges. So during this period, India worked out the Shillong Peace Accord by negotiating with NNC extremists to try and find a political solution to end this conflict. This again shows the approach of India. We have not used brutal force and mindless violence against insurgents because eventually they are our own citizens, our own people with some genuine resentment and root causes. So India has always tried addressing these problems with a multi-pronged approach. On one hand, we deal with the security problem. We use the special powers of AFSPA. Security forces are given a complete free hand to engage in coin operations, counter insurgency operations, to try and weaken and target and dismantle the terror networks. And parallelly, we show the willingness to talk, negotiate, and work out a peace agreement to provide for a political settlement. So the Shillong Accord reiterated the promises of the Akbar Hydari Agreement that independence is not possible, sovereignty can't be granted, Naga areas will remain under Indian sovereignty, but however, India showed the willingness to grant greater autonomy. By then, Nagaland had already been carved out in 1962, providing a separate state. To fulfill the demands of the Nagas, Nagaland had been granted statehood in 1962. But this, but this alone was not sufficient to address the factors and the resentment that the Naga community held. Though statehood had been granted, the government was now promising a greater degree of autonomy with constitutional protection under the Shillong Accord, and most of the leaders of NNC had agreed to the Shillong Accord. But at the last minute, before Shillong Accord could come into effect, three Naga extremists, they broke from the accord, they rejected the peace agreement with India, and they continued to fight the war against India. These notorious Naga insurgents are none other than Isaac Muiwa, and Kaplang. Please note their names as well. Isaac, Muiwa, and Kaplang. These Naga leaders of NNC, they refused to accept the Shillong Accord. They refused to settle with India. They refused to agree for the compromise. They were not willing to accept the constitutional safeguards and limited autonomy within Indian sovereignty. They wanted outright independence. They wanted to create a separate state. So they rejected the Shillong Accord, walked out of the peace agreement, and they continued the war against India. Isaac and Muiwa would align together. Initially, they founded the NSCN in 1980. This is how the National Socialist Council of Nagaland was born. NNC had been dismantled because it completely split after the Shillong Accord. So Isaac Muiwa Kaplang, who rejected the Shillong Accord, they founded the NSCN in 1980 in Myanmar, using Myanmar as a base. And now they had a new sponsorer, China. If until then Pakistan was backing NNC via East Pakistan, via Bangladesh, now through Myanmar, China became the key supporter of the new Naga insurgent group, the NSCN, one of the most notorious insurgent groups of the Northeast. Later, the group split between Isaac Muiwa and Kaplang, and two factions emerged. Kaplang maintained base in Myanmar with China's support. Even today, the Kaplang faction remains based out of Myanmar with Chinese support, whereas Isaac Muiwa faction shifted base to Bangladesh. Because by 1980s, Bangladesh had come under military rule with a pro-Pakistan and anti-India regime, and they had substantial support in Bangladesh. So now, NSCN became a nightmare for India. The group had not only become formidable, both with Pakistani and Chinese support, it had split into two parts. One faction, the Kaplang faction, operating from Myanmar with Chinese backing, Isaac Muiwa faction, operating from Bangladesh with Pakistani support and Bangladeshi state support. So the threat of Naga insurgency became very serious under the NSCN in 1980s. Even after the group split up in 1988 between the two factions, Kaplang and Isaac Muiwa faction, it remained a serious threat for India. By 1990s, India managed to weaken the movement thanks to counterinsurgency operations and improved border security, improved intelligence gathering, and the support we got as well from our neighbors. India managed to weaken these groups and they agreed for a ceasefire with India. In 1997, Isaac Muiwa faction agreed for a ceasefire and signed a suspension of operations agreement. In 2001, Kaplang faction also followed this with a ceasefire agreement. But in reality, they never stopped the war against India. Despite the ceasefire agreement, they continued the conflict. Since they continued to have the support in the neighboring countries, they continued this war and the conflict continued for many more years to come. The real big change was in the year 2009. Post 2009, at least the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN took a big hit. And that was a turning point for India in its fight against Naga insurgency. Now, first, let me tell you what are the claims of NSCN? What's their primary demand? What do these factions of NSCN want? Because see, today, there are many other splinter factions as well. For example, in Myanmar, apart from the Kaplang faction, we also have the Kole Kitovi faction, which is operating under a new young leadership, which was formed in 2011. The new younger generation of leaders, they have had a falling out with the old generation of leaders like Kaplang and Isaac Muiwa faction. They have formed their own splinter groups like Kole Kitovi faction. So today there are multiple factions of NSCN operating in India, in Bangladesh, and in Myanmar. Now, what is interesting here is that though these groups are actually influenced by left wing radical communism and even by Maoism, there is a strange religious connection. Groups like NSCN, they want to create Greater Nagalim or Greater Nagaland essentially, and they want this to be a Christian nation. So you see that strange combination of a religious ideology being linked, though religion has nothing to do with this, right? But still, these groups, they want to turn the so called nation they want to create into a Christian state. Please get my point correctly. Religion has nothing to do with this, but these are actually left-wing extremist organizations influenced by communism and Maoist ideology. Their whole setup, the way they operate, it reflects the features of and principles of a left-wing communist extremist organization. But they have a strange connection. They want to basically turn the greater Nagalim or Nagaland that they aspire for into a Christian state. Now, look at the map here. The demand of NSCN of all these factions has been to unite the Naga areas. This includes not just the Naga land, which is a state in India today, all the Naga hills where Nagas inhabit, but even the areas where Nagas are present in Assam, in Manipur, in Mizoram, in Arunachal Pradesh, and as well as the Naga areas in Myanmar. So, roughly, they want to bring this region together to form Nagalim that straddles the India Myanmar border, right? They reject the Treaty of Yandabu, which created this boundary in the first place. They want the unity of this region to be maintained. They want the historical unity between Nagas to be restored. So, this is the goal and the ambition of the Naga insurgents. But thanks to the developments in Bangladesh under then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, India managed to turn this war around. One reason why India succeeded against Naga insurgency, particularly against Isaac Muiwa faction, is because of the change in leadership in Bangladesh after 2009. India got tremendous support from Sheikh Hasina. Right from the moment she assumed leadership, India under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh established a close working relationship with Bangladesh. Because Sheikh Hasina's party, Awami League, has always been a pro India party. She has ever been grateful for India's role in the liberation of her country, in the protection of her own family, including the founding father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So, this close bond between India and Sheikh Hasina transformed the situation for us after 2009. Sheikh Hasina crushed these Northeast insurgents, destroyed the safe havens that were present here. The anti India elements in Bangladesh, pro Pakistan elements were crushed. The terror sanctuaries were destroyed. The supply of drugs, funds, and weapons were cut off. Even the top leaders were detained and extradited to India through secret collaboration between our intelligence agencies. Border security was improved with better cooperation between our border guarding forces. There was better intelligence sharing, joint covert operations between India and Bangladesh to break the backbone of these insurgent outfits that were sheltered in Bangladesh. This was a big milestone for India. That's how we could bring down Isaac Muiwa faction, which essentially surrendered and agreed for peace talks. So, as a result of these negotiations with NSC and IM, in 2015, a historic agreement was worked out between the Modi government and the NSC and IM and the Naga political groups. The framework agreement on Naga peace process was signed between Government of India, Government of Nagaland, and NSC and IM faction and the other Naga political representative groups, the Naga civil society. This was a big milestone. So, under the framework agreement, the Naga peace process has been started. And since the last 1 decade, the talks have been taking place. Negotiations are being carried out to find a solution to India's oldest lasting insurgency. But however, the peace process has stalled. I'm sure you would have guessed by now because it's been a decade since the framework agreement was signed. During the signing, PM Modi was present. It was a landmark event. It was a big milestone for India. But even after 10 years, we have not been able to finalize the peace agreement, the final peace accord, which tells you that there has been a stalemate, there has been a dead end as far as the peace talks are concerned. Now, what happened to the other faction, the Kaplang faction? Kaplang faction remains active in Myanmar. It has repeatedly broken the ceasefire. It continues to attack India. It remains at war with India. It has not surrendered. In fact, within days after the framework agreement was signed in 2015, there was a deadly attack in Manipur along the Myanmar border. A convoy of the Indian army was attacked. If you have seen the movie Uri, based on India's surgical strikes in Pakistan, The movie opens with a scene where an Indian army convoy in Manipur in the northeast is attacked by a group of insurgents, following which Indian army carried out a surgical strike in Myanmar. That opening scene of the movie is a real incident based on a real story. This is the attack I'm referring to, which is also depicted in the movie. Right after the framework agreement was signed, Kaplang faction, which was still at war, which rejected the framework agreement, it carried out a retaliation against the agreement by targeting an Indian army convoy and killing several Indian soldiers. It was one of the biggest losses for Indian army in the northeast during peacetime. So following this, Indian army retaliated with a deadly surgical strike in Myanmar, targeting the camps of NSC and Kaplang and the support network it enjoyed in Myanmar. This also shows the close collaboration between India and Myanmar as well. We have a history of collaboration with Myanmar's military regime and the security and intelligence services of Myanmar. But when India went public with this covert operation, when some ministers in the Modi government started claiming credit for this covert operation, it became a public incident. And Myanmar was very upset with India. It became a diplomatic incident. Because, see, India and Myanmar have a tacit understanding. For many years, Myanmar has been allowing Indian forces to operate at least few kilometers across the border to target the insurgent camps. But the understanding is that India doesn't speak about it. You don't acknowledge such covert operations. But when government leaders started claiming credit, started trying to create a political uh, brownie point for themselves and claim credit for the operation, it generated a backlash from Myanmar, which affected our diplomatic ties. But it was a very successful operation where India dismantled some of the infrastructure of NSC and Kaplang and other insurgents operating across the border in Myanmar. So today, the peace talks, they have hit a dead end, a stalemate, and partly the government is to be blamed as well. To take forward the peace process with Isaac Muiwa faction and with the Naga political groups, the government of India, the Ministry of Home Affairs, appointed a special envoy. A government representative was appointed. This was none other than R.N. Ravi, who was also made the governor of Nagaland to lead the peace process. R.N. Ravi was the former chief of the Joint Intelligence Committee, a very critical intelligence organization that brings intelligence from different agencies together. R.N. Ravi was also a senior director in the Intelligence Bureau, India's domestic intelligence agency, an expert in Northeast insurgency. Throughout his career, he had dealt extensively with Naga insurgency. So, based on his expertise, this former IPS officer was appointed as the governor of Nagaland by the Home Ministry and the envoy of the government to lead the talks with Naga groups to work out a settlement and find a political solution. As you know, R.N. Ravi has been known to court controversy. R.N. Ravi essentially contributed to the breakdown of talks. Of course, you can't blame R.N. Ravi alone. NSC and IM also has to be blamed for the breakdown of the talks process. See, what happened was, even though the framework agreement had been signed and peace process had been initiated, NSC and IM continued some of its illegal activities on the ground. Instead of surrendering and ending all its extremist activity, on the ground, NSC and IM was behaving like a criminal organization. Though it had stopped its insurgent attacks against India, it was still engaging in drugs trafficking. It was still engaging in extortion and kidnapping. This was not tolerable for the government, for R.N. Ravi. R.N. Ravi, I still remember, wrote a op-ed in the Hindu newspaper, calling NSC and IM as a Gunda organization, as a criminal entity. This enraged the leaders of NSC and IM and led to a war of words between R.N. Ravi and NSC and IM. Because see, NSC and IM had some very serious demands. Their demand was to have a separate constitution, a separate flag on the lines of what Jammu and Kashmir had under Article 370. They wanted such sort of a special status to be provided with a separate constitution of its own, with a separate flag, which was not politically tenable for the Modi government. Because the Modi government had clearly taken a stand against Article 370 and the same had been abrogated for J&K. So how can those demands be fulfilled for Nagaland? So this was not acceptable to the government. This was a red line. And R.N. Ravi's position, hardline position, of blaming all the fault on NSC and IM and NSCM's criminal activities, they were all responsible for the collapse and the failure of these talks. Eventually, NSC and IM threatened to boycott the negotiations. Then the Home Ministry stepped in and transferred RN Ravi as the governor of Tamil Nadu. There you know what RN Ravi has done. He has picked new controversy with the state government, right, by holding on to the bills and triggering a major standoff between the governor's office and the elected state government in Tamil Nadu. So this is the story of the Naga peace process. Right now it is deadlocked. There has not been much progress, but in the coming years, maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, you might see some fresh momentum. Maybe before the run up to the next general elections, the government would seriously give a push to try and find a final settlement. Because see, this would be a huge political victory for the Modi government to end India's first ever insurgency through a political solution would be one of the biggest achievements. That's why this topic is very, very important. Keep tracking the developments. They are reported in newspapers regularly. So, this is what you need to know about Naga insurgency. The brief history, the overall evolution of Naga insurgency, how India has dealt with it, and what is the current status. It is still a developing story. There is no end to Naga insurgency. It might end because see, Kaplang faction remains active. And according to RAW and IB, Chinese intelligence continues to back the Kaplang faction. But a peace accord with the Isaac Muiwa faction and the Naga political groups would still be a big milestone as it would bring curtains on one of the longest lasting insurgencies of independent India. Understood? So I hope the topic is clear to everyone. Now let's move on to the next topic. Let's look at Assam. See, insurgencies in Assam is a very complex topic because Assam has dealt with multiple insurgencies. You might have heard of insurgent groups like Ulfa. You would have heard of Bodo insurgency and various other small insurgencies like Dima Hasao insurgency, then Kamtapur Liberation Organization, KLO, then Karbi Anglong insurgent movements. So we will not touch upon the minor insurgencies that the region has seen because the Kamtapur movement, Karbi Anglong movement, even the Dima Hasao movement, they have mainly focused on greater autonomy or on statehood. Their demand has not been separatism. Unlike Naga insurgency, the Naga insurgents, they wanted a separate state, a separate country for themselves to break the Naga areas away from India. But in Assam, we have seen other minor insurgencies like Karbi Anglong, Dima Hasao, etc. Their demand has not been separatism. Their demand has been more autonomy under the constitution or even statehood demands. Now, these demands have been satisfied. These insurgencies have been tackled with through security operations and by providing some constitutional flexibility by granting 6th schedule autonomy under the provisions of Article 244, where autonomous district councils have been set up in the Karbi Anglong region, Dima Hasao region. Kamtapur Liberation Organization was a separatist group fighting for separatism. It wanted to break the former princely state of Kamtapur, present in then Assam and West Bengal near Siliguri corridor. They were leading a war to break that area away from India. But we have managed to contain the movement. Now we are in talks with KLO as well. Recently, you might remember, you might have read in papers that the leader of KLO, who was hiding in Myanmar, has surrendered and he has come back to India. And secret negotiations are going on between the government and the KLO. So very soon we will settle this conflict as well by maybe granting some autonomy, making some concessions within the ambit of the Indian constitution. So these insurgencies are almost done and dusted. So statehood demands have been dealt with by granting more autonomy under 6th schedule provisions. That again shows you the flexibility of the Indian constitution, the beauty of the Indian constitution to handle these pressure points. How greater autonomy can be granted on genuine grounds, especially the tribal belt in Assam, in Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura. There are autonomous district councils, 10 autonomous district councils which have been set up to provide a degree of constitutional autonomy so that the tribal communities can manage their tribal affairs, manage their tribal land and resources, and protect their rights while maintaining the sovereignty of the nation. With KLO, we are in talks. The group did pose a concern at one point, but today it's a dormant group, and the leader has surrendered recently, come back to India from Myanmar, and government of India is talking to KLO to finally work out a peace process with Kamtapur Liberation Organization as well. So these are very minor topics, not too relevant. But what is more important would be Ulfa insurgency and the Bodo insurgency, which we will discuss in detail. Let's start with Ulfa's insurgency in Assam. Ulfa stands for United Liberation Front of Assam. It was established in 1970s, and there is again a very interesting history behind it. So what was the root cause for this insurgency led by Ulfa? The Assam has been one of the few states in our country which has been very badly affected by the constant influx of refugees and then illegal migrants. During partition in 1947, from East Pakistan, there was a huge flow of refugees into Northeast India, primarily received by Assam. In 1970-71, when Pakistan committed brutal atrocities against Bengalis in East Pakistan, close to 10 million refugees flowed into India. Assam took the maximum brunt, along with West Bengal and other border states. Then, post 1971, after Bangladesh was liberated, as Bangladeshi economy was struggling, there were no opportunities in Bangladesh. People of Bangladesh entered India in very large numbers as illegal migrants, and it has continued till date. Especially from 1971 to 2009, illegal migration was a major concern, as lakhs of illegal migrants had reportedly entered India, spread out across India, particularly in the state of Assam. Today, according to the BSF, the Border Guarding Force, the extent of illegal migration has gone down drastically in the last couple of decades. Credit goes to the Sheikh Hasina regime for providing better economic growth and development, for creating jobs in Bangladesh, for improving the standard of living. As a result, most Bangladeshis, they did not have the need to come out into India as illegal migrants. So this has played a big role, but still illegal migration continues on a small scale even today. So the constant entry of refugees and then illegal migrants has basically had an impact on the demography of the region. The native Assamese, who have been historically dominant here since the days of the Ahom kingdom, they felt threatened by the constant influx from East Pakistan, especially the influx of refugees and illegal migrants in 1970-71 and post 1971. This triggered socio-ethnic tensions between the communities on ethnic lines, linguistic lines, and communal lines. Then by 1970s, there were allegations that the voters list had been manipulated, with illegal migrants getting their names registered with a voter ID card with the help of some local politicians and political parties. They were basically trying to turn the illegal migrants into a vote bank, because in every constituency, few lakh illegal migrants or few thousand illegal migrants could potentially turn the elections around. So those politicians and parties who would help them to get the fake voter IDs, get their names listed on the voters list, in turn, the illegal migrants would vote for them. They would become political entities, right holders. And those politicians who get elected would serve the interests of illegal migrants, creating a direct concern for the Assamese. The Assamese were worried about their language. They were concerned about inter-communal, interlinguistic marriages, which could threaten their language, identity, land, and resources and opportunities. During elections in 1970s and 80s, there were large-scale allegations that the electoral list had been manipulated, with illegal migrants finding their names onto the voters list. Now, this was the pressure point that was building up. It was like a pressure cooker which was about to blow. In 1979, massive agitation broke out in Assam that lasted for nearly 6 years until 1985. This is what we call the Assam agitation, led primarily by the student leaders, the Assam Students' Union, with other local political participants. They rebelled against the Indian state, leading massive protests, and the government responded with brutal force against the protesters. The protest, the agitation was against illegal migration, the unchecked illegal migration from East Pakistan and then from Bangladesh. So when the police and security forces crushed the rebellion, crushed the agitation with violence, this created more resentment and anger amongst the youth, amongst the student leaders. So some of the radical student leaders broke away from the protests, they broke away from the agitation, and they founded ULFA. This is how ULFA was born in 1978-79 under leaders like Arvind Rajkova and Paresh Barua and the others. You might have heard of names such as Anup Chetya, Arvind Rajkova, and Paresh Barua. These were the radical student leaders of that era from the Assam agitation who broke from the protests and declared a war against the Indian state. They founded ULFA as an insurgent group to fight for the liberation of Assam, to completely break Assam from India and to form a separate country for themselves. Now, let me expose the hypocrisy of these insurgent groups. ULFA, which was claiming to fight against illegal migration from Bangladesh, which was looking to even target Bangladeshi illegal migrants, it eventually took support in Bangladesh itself. ULFA leaders, when they were hunted by Indian forces and Indian intelligence agencies, when they were targeted under counter-insurgency operations by Indian Army and Assam Rifles, equipped with the special powers of AFSPA, these ULFA leaders ran away to the same country, the country which they were blaming for illegal migration. They themselves took shelter in Bangladesh as illegals because there was active support being provided. Remember, by 1975, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had been assassinated. Awami League government had been toppled. So a friendly pro-India government was gone and Bangladesh had come under military dictatorship. And this military regime of Bangladesh in late 70s and 80s was pro-Pakistan and anti-India. So Pakistan used this fertile opportunity. The ISI was actively involved with Bangladeshi intelligence to provide the direct support to ULFA. They gave them a safe haven. They protected these ULFA leaders, gave them drugs, funds, money, and weapons to wage this war against India. And ULFA became a notorious threat throughout 1980s and 1990s, lasting until early 2000. See, Assam agitation was eventually brought to an end. In 1985, the Assam Accord was negotiated between Government of India, the Government of Assam, and the agitators who were part of the protests. Through the Assam Accord, the government had promised to update the 1951 NRC, the National Register for Citizens. The NRC is basically a database, a list containing the names of Indian citizens in the state of Assam. It is unique and specific to the state of Assam. This register was updated in 1951 following partition to basically list out the Indian citizens in Assam and to distinguish them from the foreigners, from the illegal migrants and refugees. But since Assam had received a lot of refugees and illegal migrants in 1970, 1971, and after 1971, the demand of Assam agitation and the protesters was to update the NRC. This commitment was made by the government. The government committed that, yes, we will update NRC. And many other promises were made. On one side, ULFA's insurgency had begun, especially following the rigging of elections in 1978 and in 1983. ULFA's insurgency had picked up. It had become a serious security threat. And parallelly, we brought the agitation to an end through the Assam Accord. Under the Assam Accord, the government had promised to update NRC. This promised NRC was not conducted by subsequent governments because governments realized that conducting such an exercise is complicated. It could add more fuel to the fire because how exactly will you establish someone's identity and citizenship in such a complex region, right? People may not have the right documents to prove that they are Indian citizens. Genuine Indian citizens might get excluded. And we have seen instances where illegal migrants had got not just fake documents, they had got original documents as well. From voter ID cards to ration cards to land documents to even passports. So when illegal migrants are also having original documents or even fake documents, they might get included in the list. So given the complexity of the problem, and quickly this acquired a communal angle. Various political parties exploited this communally on the lines of targeting the Muslims, blaming all Bangladeshi illegal migrants as Muslims, leading to communal tensions as well. So given that it was a very hot situation, most governments kept this issue aside. They kept on pushing it. until 2012. In 2012, the Supreme Court intervened based on a petition, and Supreme Court ordered the government to conduct the NRC, which had been promised under Assam Accord. So, under the monitoring of the Supreme Court, NRC was carried out in Assam. Verification was done on the basis of around 12 documents, and a draft NRC was published in 2018. Can you guess how many names were excluded in the draft NRC? Any idea? Can someone guess how many names, how many people were excluded from the NRC in the draft list of 2018? Also tell me how many were excluded in the final list that was published in 2019. What is the scale that we are looking at? Anyone? Okay. In the draft list, 4 million people were excluded. That's 40 lakh people. Just imagine if so many people are declared stateless, they're no longer Indian citizens. And if, let's say, eventually we uh, provide them maybe one chance to prove their citizenship through foreigner tribunals, and if they don't have the documents to prove that, they will be detained in detention centers. Eventually, India would try to deport them back to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh may not accept them. So we were looking at a staggering humanitarian crisis. So it was revised again, and the final list was published. In the final list, 1.9 million people have been left out. From 4 million, the list came down to 1.9 million. And since then, there has been no further movement, because even the government is aware of the complexity of this exercise. There have been many recorded instances of unfair exclusion, unfair inclusions. Investigative reports by media, by activists have shown Indian citizens who have served in the Indian army have been excluded from the list because they didn't have the documents. Because you have to prove that you were in India before the cutoff date, which is the midnight of 24th March 1971, the day on which Pakistani army unleashed Operation Searchlight, the deadly military operation under which Pakistan targeted the Bengalis in East Pakistan. Many of them may not have the right documents to prove their family tree. They have to prove that even some of their ancestors were in India before the cutoff date. There have been cases where illegal migrants who have managed to get fake or original documents have got them enrolled on the list. So there have been many, many cases of unfair exclusions, unfair inclusions. So given the crisis, the government has basically put a hold. It's not gone ahead with the next logical step. The next logical step is that these 1.9 million people should be given a chance to be heard by the foreigner tribunals in Assam. They should be given a chance to appeal. They should be given a chance to present their case to prove that they are Indian citizens. And if they cannot prove that, they can be ordered to be detained by the police. Assam police has a dedicated foreigners division. There are detention centers which have been set up. So once declared as foreigners, as illegal migrants, they can be detained. And eventually, India will have to deport them to Bangladesh. But of course, that will depend whether Bangladesh will accept them or not. So this remains a standing issue in Assam even today. Now, on the other hand, coming back to ULFA and the Assam Accord, ULFA was leading its insurgency in the 1980s, carrying out attacks against Indian forces, against the Indian state. Through the Assam Accord, the agitation at least was brought to an end. A lot of promises were made. Apart from updating the NRC, the government made a promise to deport the illegal migrants and even promised constitutional guarantees to be provided in order to protect the interests of Assamese. The government promised to constitute a committee based on which recommendations would be brought out and implemented to give some sort of reservation, privileges, and quotas to protect the socio-economic rights and welfare of the Assamese community. This has been recently implemented. Based on the recommendations of a committee, some of these rights and privileges have been accorded to the Assamese with increased reservation and quotas and privileges in government programs and welfare schemes with regard to education, welfare, etc., jobs, etc. But the issue remains persistent on the ground. The fear of the outsiders, the fear of the illegal migrants, the possible return of insurgency remains still very active on the ground. But ULFA has seen a slow decline and death. Over the years, India has managed to crush ULFA, especially thanks to the support we received from Sheikh Hasina's government in Bangladesh. from 2009 to 2011. Within a couple of years, the group was decimated. By then, Ulfa also had split into two factions. Arbind Rajkova and Anup Chetia were hiding in Bangladesh and operating the main faction of Ulfa from Bangladesh. But the other faction, led by Paresh Barua, took shelter in Myanmar and even today remains an active insurgent outfit with Chinese support. Indian intelligence has spotted Paresh Barua on the Myanmar China border, and India believes that Paresh Barua is getting direct support from China's Ministry of State Security. So, Paresh Barua's Ulfa faction, known as Ulfa Independent, Ulfa I, remains active along the Myanmar China border with possible Chinese covert assistance. Whereas Arbind Rajkova, Anup Chetia, their faction in Bangladesh was decimated by Sheikh Hasina's leadership and the collaboration with the Manmohan Singh government. These leaders were detained and handed over to India. They eventually were forced to talk to India, and a suspension of operations agreement was signed in 2011. Suspension of operations agreement is nothing but a ceasefire agreement, a commitment that both sides will stop their attacks on each other, commitment that Indian forces will not target the insurgent group, insurgents will lay down their arms and surrender, they'll not target the Indian forces and the Indian state. So that is a suspension of operations agreement, which was signed in 2011 between the main faction of Ulfa, headed by Arbind Rajkova and Anup Chetia, and the ceasefire was brought into effect. But there is still one faction of Ulfa, Ulfa I, Ulfa Independent, which is still active in Myanmar, and its leader Paresh Barua is known to have close links to Chinese intelligence. Recently, you might have read about few attacks in tea plantations, in oil refining plants in Assam, where workers have been kidnapped. Such minor attacks which have happened in the last few years, they have been carried out by Paresh Barua's faction. But in 2023, there was a very, very big breakthrough for India. We have finalized the peace pact, the peace accord with the main faction of Ulfa. Please make a note. This is very, very important. With the main faction of Ulfa, the Modi government has struck a peace deal, bringing one of the longest lasting insurgencies to an end. Of course, Ulfa Independent is not part of the agreement. Paresh Barua faction remains at war, just like the Kaplang faction of NSCN. Clear? Whereas the main faction of Ulfa has completely surrendered, accepted the ceasefire, and accepted the peace accord as well. So this partly brings one of the oldest insurgencies, the most notorious insurgency, to an end. But Paresh Barua's independent faction remains active in Myanmar. So under the peace accord, India has agreed for some concessions in return for ending this insurgency permanently. We have agreed to increase local representation for Assamese in the state assembly, in the legislative assembly. 97 out of 126 assembly seats in the Assam state assembly would be reserved for indigenous people. For the native communities like Assamese, reservation would be given to increase their political representation. The government has committed to implement the constitutional privileges and rights that are guaranteed to protect the land, the culture, and the identity of the Assamese. The government has promised a development package of 1.5 lakh crores to bring additional investment into Assam, to bring development so that it can benefit the local community. And the government has made a commitment to ensure that illegal migrants will not pose a threat. Border security will be improved. AFSPA is being slowly removed. Today, it remains only in 15% of Assam's geographical area. Because, see, AFSPA is a draconian law. It has been very controversial. Across Northeast India, even in Punjab and in Jammu and Kashmir, where it has been implemented, it has allegedly been misused by few rogue officers to carry out fake encounters, fake killings, even kidnappings and torture, and even rape and molestation. Because see, it grants complete immunity for the actions of the forces in an area declared as a disturbed area. These allegations have been taken up for investigation by various commissions. Supreme Court has looked into these cases as well. They have found prima facie evidence of misuse of AFSPA. The Santosh Hegde Committee, the VP Jeevan Reddy Commission, The second ARC under Veerappa Moily, Justice Verma Commission set up after the Nirbhaya gang rape incident. The Supreme Court itself has found several violations under AFSPA. Prima facie, fake killings, rapes, molestations have been noted. Suggestions have been provided. Changes have been made to its implementation. So there's a lot of anger and resentment against AFSPA in areas where it is implemented. So the government has been slowly removing it in areas where normalcy has come back. And in Assam, it remains active only in 15% roughly of the geographical area. So this provides for greater development opportunities. The government has promised more investments, more projects, better welfare for the natives, and in return, Ulfa's main faction has completely surrendered. So, this is a transformation that India has achieved. And this is again a lesson in conflict management, in conflict resolution. You saw this with Naga insurgency as well, with Ulfa's insurgency as well. Because we have a multi pronged approach, we don't use brutal and unchecked force to bring down these insurgencies. Using brutal, unchecked force will only result in gross human right violations. It will only create more resentment, it will create more hatred, it will only perpetuate the conflict. If you want to bring a conflict to an end, an internal conflict which involves your own people, your own citizens, on one side, you have to tackle the security threat through your security forces, through your intelligence agencies, through special laws like AFSPA. On the other hand, you have to focus on development. You have to focus on healing the wounds, negotiating with them, fulfilling some of their genuine demands and grievances, having a peace process to find a political solution, and implementing those promises so that you can pull the people away from the path of insurgency. So, this is the balanced approach of India. On one side, we have used the security measures when necessary to weaken the insurgents. On the other hand, we have shown the willingness to talk to the insurgents and arrive at a political settlement, to use the flexibility of our constitution, to provide autonomy, to provide privileged reservations, to protect tribal rights and tribal land. So that is the approach that India has followed. Now, coming to another insurgency in Assam, the Bodo insurgency, which is another major topic. Now, first, let's understand who are the Bodos. The Bodos are an ethno linguistic group found in the northwestern part of Assam, towards the northwestern region of the Brahmaputra River Valley. Now, look at the map here. You can see the state of Assam. To the northwest region of Brahmaputra Valley, there are 4 districts present here: Kokrajhar, Chirang, Baksa, Udalguri. This is the region dominated by the Bodo community, which is an ethno-linguistic minority in Assam. The Bodos have a long-standing issue with the Assamese. As I told you, Assamese have been the most dominant group in this region, particularly the state of Assam. Minority groups like Bodos, Dima Hasaos, Karbi Anglongs, they have felt discriminated. They felt oppressed by the Assamese. So there is an internal struggle amongst tribes and ethnic groups for their identity, land, and rights and resources. Bodos have had some genuine complaints and grievances. For example, the Bodos, they speak a distinct language, the Bodo language. The Bodo language was never given the same recognition and equal treatment as that of Assamese. Assam's government imposed Assamese on everyone, which was rejected by other tribes and other groups. When it comes to political representation, economic progress, and social rights, Bodos felt that they were being deliberately discriminated by the dominant Assamese. So this was the resentment that created a divide. And in 1980s, we saw the emergence of Bodo insurgency. The demand was to break the Bodo areas to create a separate Bodo land. These Bodo insurgents also had an issue with illegal migration. They saw the Bengali illegal migrants from Bangladesh as a threat. Because, see, in this part of Assam, which I showed you, Kokrajhar, Udalgiri, Baksa, etc., they are known for tea plantations. Since British era, plantation crops have been cultivated here. The British brought plantation workers from central India. So tribes like Santal, Mundas, Dogria Kond, these central Indian tribes also have been brought and settled here since the British days. And the Bodos have resisted them. They have disliked them. They see the outsiders as a threat. When Bengali illegal migrants came in, they saw them as a threat. And in 1980s, Bodo insurgency began as a movement against all these challenges. So Bodos were opposed to the domination of Assamese. They were opposed to the illegal migrants from Bangladesh, opposed to the tribal plantation workers from central India. All these factors were responsible. And the first insurgent group here was the BDSF, Bodo Security Force, that was formed in 1980s. And the Bodo demands have varied as well. Some Bodo groups have demanded autonomy. They have been happy just to agree to autonomy within the constitution. Some Bodo groups have asked for a separate state to break away from Assam. But some notorious Bodo insurgent groups have been separatist groups. They want to break away from India to create a separate country altogether. So one of the leaders who founded BDSF, a notorious terrorist, Ranjan Daimari, was at the forefront of this movement. India, which started targeting the group in 1980s, 1990s, we managed to weaken the outfit and we opened talks with some of the moderate factions of the Bodo groups. In 1993, India worked out the first Bodo peace accord and granted some autonomy. It was not constitutional autonomy. Some limited autonomy was given in return for ending the violent movement. So those members of BDSF who were accepting the autonomy which was being given, they surrendered, they ended the conflict. And the first Bodo Accord led to the establishment of Bodoland Autonomous Council with some limited autonomous powers but without constitutional guarantees. It was not under 6th schedule. It was not with constitutional protection. Limited autonomy was granted. Some Bodo leaders agreed to it, and this was the first Bodo Accord. But as you can guess, it was rejected by Ranjan Daimari. The other Bodo extremists rejected the accord. So they broke from BDSF and they founded a notorious terrorist organization, the NDFB, National Democratic Front of Bodoland, in 1994. And again, the hypocrisy of these groups is that NDFB took shelter in Bangladesh. They kept on targeting Bengali illegal migrants. They even targeted Indian Muslims, blaming all of them as Bengali illegal migrants, turning this into a communal conflict. But they themselves took shelter in Bangladesh as illegals because they were getting state support from a hostile Bangladeshi government and from Pakistani state actors. Ranjan Daimari thrived in Bangladesh, setting up a terrorist network with ISI's backing, with funds and weapons from Pakistan and Bangladesh, waging the war against India. So, in the midst of this, there was another new group that was formed. While NDFB was carrying out ethnic cleansing, it was targeting Assamese, it was targeting the tea plantation workers, it was targeting the Muslims in the region. When such brutal atrocities were being committed by this terrorist organization, there was a new group that came up, the Bodo Liberation Tiger Force, the BLTF, in mid 1990s after the first Bodo Accord. Now, the BLTF was slightly different, relatively more moderate than NDFB. Their demand was either constitutional autonomy or statehood. They didn't want a separate country. They didn't want to break from India. They wanted to be within India, within Indian sovereignty and under Indian constitution, but with greater autonomy, maybe constitutional autonomy and a demand for statehood. Now, what was interesting was the NDFB was largely seen as a Christian dominated entity. Again, curiously, though these are left wing extremist communist organizations with regard to their ideology, their inspiration, their structure, there is an interesting religious connect. Whereas the BLTF, the Bodo Liberation Tiger Force, was largely Hindu dominated. This even led to an allegation, a conspiracy theory that the Hindu dominated BLTF was probably a creation of Indian intelligence. There has been a strong allegation that Indian intelligence agencies, IB, RAW, might have propped BLTF as a counter to NDFB to weaken the NDFB, which was a notorious threat. As NDFB was a separatist group, getting support in Bangladesh, getting the backing of Pakistan, maybe to target NDFB, it's alleged. Again, we don't know, we have no confirmation of this. There's a strong allegation that BLTF was a proxy of the Indian agencies to weaken and target the NDFB. Because that's exactly what happened. Because of the conflicting demands of these groups, they became rivals of each other. So NDFB, which was leading a separatist war, started targeting BLTF, which was only asking for autonomy and statehood. They became rivals of each other, and a war broke out between these two entities. The violence increased even further. Finally, India convinced BLTF to surrender. In 2003, the BLTF surrendered by signing the Second Bodo Accord. Through this, India granted constitutional autonomy. Under the provisions of 6th schedule, Bodoland region was declared as a autonomous district council with greater autonomy under constitutional guarantees, and BLTF surrendered, ending its violent insurgency. In the meanwhile, the tea plantation workers, primarily the Santals, they had formed the Bengali Tiger Force with native Bengalis to protect themselves against the attacks of NDFB. So at one point, multiple militias, armed groups were operating here. It was not just your NDFB and its factions. There was BLTF with different demands. There was Bengali Tiger Force for self-defense of the Bengali community, the Muslims and the tribal plantation workers, because they were being attacked by NDFB militants. This became a very complex and dangerous situation. The Second Bodo Accord brought back some sense of stability. The BLTF surrendered, accepted the concessions which was being given by the Indian government, and that is how Bodoland Territorial Council became the 6th schedule autonomous district council. But NDFB's war continued for a few more years. Now, eventually, the turning point was 2009. The turning point was Sheikh Hasina again. This again tells you how important our security relations are with Bangladesh. Thanks to the cooperation built by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, the close border security partnership and intelligence partnership that was cultivated, Sheikh Hasina broke the back of these groups. NDFB was decimated. Ranjan Daimari was arrested and handed over to India. And NDFB was completely brought down through the collaboration of Indian and Bangladeshi security agencies. Eventually, India started talking to NDFB, and recently the Modi government achieved a big milestone. In 2020, the third Bodo Peace Accord was signed. So there are three different Bodo Accords. The first Accord of 1993, where only some faction of BDSF surrendered, but NDFB was formed. We had the second Bodo Accord of 2003, where BLTF surrendered with constitutional autonomy being granted, but NDFB continued its war. And in 2020, NDFB also has entered the peace process, and today Bodo insurgency has come to a complete end. All NDFB factions have surrendered. The cadres have laid down their arms. They have been brought back into the mainstream, and in return, the government has made some concessions. The government has promised greater investments for infrastructure and opportunities and development. New universities and organizations are being set up by the central government to create opportunities for the Bodo youth. And even the geographical territory of this autonomous region has been redrawn. This was a long-standing demand of the Bodos, because even though constitutional autonomy had been given, where the Bodo Territorial Autonomous Division was governed by the Bodoland Territorial Council, the problem was within the autonomous region, there were some non-Bodo areas and villages which were benefiting as well. And some Bodo dominated villages were present outside the autonomous area, which were not enjoying the constitutional protection. So, to address this mismatch, the autonomous region's territory was redrawn. Previously, it was called BTAD, Bodoland Territorial Autonomous Division. Now, after the redrawing of the boundary, it's called BTR, Bodoland Territorial Region, which is governed by the same BTC, Bodoland Territorial Council, as per the provisions of 6th schedule. So non-Bodo villages have been excluded. Bodo villages outside of this area have been included. And Bodoland Territorial Council also has autonomy in appointment of senior government officers. When the DC of a district is being appointed, SP of the district police is being appointed, the autonomous council has to be consulted with the state government of Assam before making these key appointments. So such flexibility has been provided through the third Bodo Accord, and NDFB has fully surrendered, bringing Bodo insurgency to an end. This again is a successful case of India resolving a conflict through a mix of security operations, by employing the hard power of the state, and by negotiating, by working out a peace agreement, by showing the flexibility. So, this is the approach that India has always taken to deal with insurgency in Northeast. Now, let's move on. Let's quickly complete the remaining topics. Next, we will discuss Manipur. The next big topic is Manipur. After this, the rest of the topics are very small topics. We can quickly wrap it up. So just stay with me. I know it's a long session, but that's the purpose of a marathon. So that in one class, right, as quickly as possible, you can cover all the key topics with the right discussion, with the right analysis that's needed for the exam. So I hope all of you are enjoying the session, understanding every key topic. I'm trying to pace it appropriately, covering and repeating some points when necessary. Plus, the PPTs are also detailed enough, giving you enough points for your notes, for your answer writing. So let me know if you like the class which is going on. Do press the like button, share the video with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now let's talk about the insurgency in Manipur and the deep ethnic divisions in Manipur. This is another key topic which is in the news as well as part of current developments. See, Manipur also has a rich history behind it. The then Meitei kingdom, the Manipuri kingdom, ruled by the Meitei Hindus, it had historically enjoyed its independence at least until 1891. Then, when the British entered this region, they fought a war briefly with the Meitei rulers. Of course, the British defeated the Meitei rulers. But after defeating the Meitei kingdom, instead of annexing the kingdom under British India, the British gave limited autonomy to the Meitei rulers. I told you at the beginning, the British were very shrewd, they were very smart. They realized that they should not get involved in the indigenous issues and tribal issues. It would be hard to manage a tribal territory. They just wanted the resources, they just wanted access to the land, they just wanted connectivity with Burma. They wanted to loot the forest wealth and resources. That's all they wanted. They did not care about the people or the administration. So they gave autonomy to the local rulers. The Meiteis believed they were still independent. This is the perception the Meiteis had. The Meitei Hindu rulers and the Meitei Pangals, the Meitei Muslims, they were still under the perception they were somehow autonomous and independent when only British had granted limited autonomy to them. It was not true independence. They had to be subservient to the British Empire. They were subordinates of the British Empire, just a princely state, nothing less, nothing more. But the rulers came to believe that they were always independent. So in 1947 to 1949, following India's independence, when Meiteis were pushed by India, by the leaders like Nehru, Sardar Patel, and the Indian National Congress to merge with India, they felt it was a forceful merger. They felt that centuries of their autonomy had been taken away. Because the Meiteis, both the Meitei Hindus and the Meitei Pangals and the Meitei natives, who have their distinct faith as well, right? Even before Hinduism, Islam entered here, the Meiteis were historically following a different religious and spiritual practice. These Meiteis, they felt that they were disconnected with rest of India historically, culturally. They didn't want to be a part of India. So when they were pushed to join Indian Union, they felt it was a forceful merger. This had left some anger, some resentment. But this was not the root cause for insurgency. There was something else. For this, you have to understand the internal dynamics, the social fabric of Manipur. Now, if you look at Manipur, its geography, its demography, experts believe that Manipur is like a stadium, like a cricket or a football stadium. The physical geography of Manipur is often compared with that of a cricket stadium. Why? Because in a cricket or football stadium, you have the low lying playing area, the field, which is present in the center. Around the playing area, you have the spectator stands rising above it, right? All around it. Manipur is similar to that. Its physical geography resembles that of a stadium because right in the middle, in the Imphal Valley, this is where you find the headquarters, the capital. Since the princely era, this is the area dominated by the Meiteis and the Meitei Pangals. Just 10% of the land area dominated by 65% of the population. Clearly, Meiteis are in majority, right? In 10% of the land mass in the Imphal Valley, this is where 65% of the state's population is found, and majority of them are Meiteis, including Methi Hindus, the traditional Metis and the Methi Pangals, who are the Methi Muslims. Now, around the Imphal Valley, which is the low-lying area, you have the hills, the Manipur hills that rise around it, from Tamenglong to Churchandpur, to Chandel, Ukrul, to Senapati. Now, districts like Senapati, Ukrul, etc., are dominated by the Nagas, the same Nagas which we discussed earlier. Subgroups of Nagas are found here from Senapati to Ukrul. Then, from Chandel to Churchandpur, you primarily find the Kukis, who have historically migrated from Myanmar, from then Burma. Historically, there was a very good relationship between the Metis and Kukis. There is a history where Kukis actually helped the Metis to fight Nagas. When Metis perceived a threat from Nagas during British rule, the Metis rulers, they brought in Kuki-Zo community from Burma to back them and support them, to create a buffer. Kuki-Zos were settled between Metis land and Naga hills to offer protection for the Metis. And jointly they had fought against Naga tribes many decades ago. But today things are very different. Now, if you take the hill tribes, this area accounts for 90% of the state's geographical area, but the population here is just 35%. Right? So you can understand the demographical difference. For Metis, the land available is very less, though they are politically, economically dominant and superior, and more population is all concentrated, centered in the Imphal Valley, in just 10% of the land mass. Whereas the hill areas has most of the territory, 90% of the state's territory, but 35% population is present here. But please understand, hills always have a bigger disadvantage compared to plain areas and valley areas. Because in plains and valleys, it's easy to develop, it's easy to create infrastructure, to build projects. Whereas in the hills, connectivity is not there. They are remote areas, not connected. Development is difficult. Creating jobs is very difficult. So hill communities always have a natural disadvantage. And since Nagas and Kukis were in minority, and Metis were clearly in majority, and they were well off socially and financially, the hill tribes were recognized as the scheduled tribes post independence. Now, this is where the trouble began. First of all, Metis had a resentment that India had forcefully pushed the Methi kingdom to merge with India, erasing Methi identity. Methi rulers obviously resented it. They lost their title, they lost their wealth, they lost their authority. Now, the Indian state was giving privilege to Nagas, to Kukis, recognizing these minority tribes as hill tribes, giving them scheduled tribe status, which brings lot of privileges to them. Once you get scheduled hill tribe status, there will be reservation in education, in government jobs. More importantly, tribal land gets complete protection, constitutional protection. So Metis cannot go to hill areas and buy Naga land and Kuki land. Whereas Nagas, Kukis can come down to Imphal, settle in Imphal, and buy the Methi property as well. This mainly became a question of land, rights, resources, and opportunities. The interethnic, intertribal divisions between Metis and Nagas, Metis and Kukis has existed from a long time. So from 1960s, this turned into a violent conflict. The Metis who were enraged, they took up arms to fight for their rights and set up multiple insurgent organizations. This was a direct response to Naga insurgency. I want you to understand how these two are connected. Because please understand, the Naga National Council was already leading Naga insurgency in 1950s. What was the objective of the Naga insurgents? To unite all Naga areas that included the Naga hills in Senapati, Ukrul, which belongs to Manipur. So the integrity of the state of Manipur was threatened by Naga insurgency, and they had a cross-border connection. Across the border in Myanmar, there were Naga groups supporting Naga insurgents in India. Same with Kukis. Kukis came out with their own separatist movement led by the Kuki armed groups, the Kuki insurgent outfits. And they were connected to the Zomi community in neighboring Myanmar. The Kukis had started their own insurgent movement. the Metis felt cornered. They felt smaller tribes like Nagas have their insurgency going on, they have constitutional protection, their land is protected, they have support from across the border as well from Nagas. They felt Kukis, their hills and lands are protected, they have support from Zozomis from Myanmar. So Metis felt cornered, they felt threatened, and they rebelled against these changes. And they took up armed violence to protect their land and rights and identity and triggered a permanent war in this region. So all the groups have had their insurgent group outfits. There are Kuki armed groups, Naga insurgent groups that we have discussed, and the Methi insurgent groups. So whatever happens across the India-Myanmar border has directly impacted the situation in Manipur. So in that regard, Manipur is a very volatile state. On ethnic lines, there are very strong divisions that are present, which can easily break apart and turn into major clashes. So in 1960s, Manipur descended into chaos. On one hand, Naga insurgents were threatening Metis. Metis founded their own insurgent groups. Later, Kukis also started their armed movement, triggering a multi-frontal conflict. So in 1960s, there were very serious violent clashes between Methi armed groups and the Naga outfits. In 1990s, clashes took place between Nagas and Kuki, between the two hill tribes. Again, it was a fight for land and resources. And we also have fights between Metis and Kukis, which has now escalated again since 2023. So whatever you have seen in Manipur in the last 2, 3 years, it's not a new development. There is a history to it. It goes back to 1950s, 1960s when the insurgency first broke out over here. So the cross-border connection is very important. So if Naga insurgents had groups like NNC and NSCN, Metis set up different insurgent groups as well. UNLF, United National Liberation Front, mainly made up of the Methi community. The PLA, People's Liberation Army, made up of the Metis again. These two were communist as far as their ideology was concerned, left-wing extremist organizations. Then you also have the PRIPAK, People's Revolutionary Party of Kanglepak, mainly made up of Metis, and their vision is to bring back the glory of the empire, bring back the nationalist ethno identity of the Metis by restoring the Manipuri kingdom, the Methi kingdom. So you have a mix of Methi insurgent groups like the PREPAK, UNLF, PLA, some of the oldest insurgents of Northeast India. Then Kuki Zo groups have formed their own armed insurgent outfits with cross-border support from Zozomi community. So this has been a deep-rooted conflict which has been going on. Manipur initially was a Part C state after its merger with India. So the Metis saw this as a disrespect. They saw this as a downgrade of their status. Eventually, it became a union territory for some time, and then it was granted statehood in the subsequent reorganization that was done in 1972. But with the breakout of the insurgency, it was declared a disturbed area, which is a precondition for imposing AFSPA, and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was brought in. So under these powers, Indian Army, Assam Rifles have targeted these armed groups, these insurgent groups. It has led to large-scale violence. There are allegations of misuse of AFSPA as well. You might have heard of human rights activists such as Arom Sharmila, who went on a hunger strike for years together, protesting against the atrocities of Indian forces. The Indian forces generally are very professional, well trained, they understand the law of the land. They know that they can't misuse the provisions and the powers given to them. But every once in a while, there are these rogue officers who have misused the authority and the law which provides them special powers, either for promotions, either for hikes, for rewards, or sometimes purely to draw the thrill out of abusing the authority which is given to them. So they have been held guilty of committing illegal killings, rapes, murders. So in Manipur, there have been some deadly incidents that have happened, hundreds and hundreds of them. Even commissions like the BP Jeevan Reddy Commission, Santosh Hegde Commission, the Supreme Court, they have taken note of these cases. So there is a very brutal history over here, but eventually the usage of such force helped in curbing insurgency in Manipur. By 1980s, Manipur relatively became peaceful. Though insurgency violence was raging from 1960s to 1980s, after this, in 1990s, early 2000, the scale of violence went down. Manipur had become quite stable. Once in a while, there would be some attack, there would be cases of human right violations, etc. But by and large, Manipur had become relatively stable by 1990s and early 2000. In fact, until 2020, until 2023, for the last 2 3 decades, Manipur had been relatively peaceful. That's why recently the government has struck another important peace accord with UNLF, one of the oldest insurgent groups of Northeast India, United National Liberation Front, the Methi insurgent group, has agreed for a ceasefire, a suspension of operations agreement. In return, Government of India has made a lot of concessions to end the Methi insurgency led by UNLF. It's a recent development. This is after the ethnic violence restarted between Methis and Kukis, right? In 2023, end of 2023, which was few months after the crisis had broken out, India has managed to strike the peace accord with the UNLF, and it's a big milestone. Through this peace accord, UNLF has completely surrendered, ending its nearly 60 years of insurgency against India. So it's a big milestone for us as far as counterinsurgency is concerned. And in return, the government is making concessions to bring development, to bring investments, particularly into Imphal Valley, because this is the area dominated by the Metis. Government is promising a lot of privileges, fresh investments and projects to the Imphal region to create opportunities for the Methi youth. And UNLF has surrendered, agreed to bring its war to an end. But what really bothers India now is the latest phase of violence which has erupted since May 2023. So, what is this violence all about? What was the trigger, the root cause? See, in many ways, it is connected to what happened in Myanmar, in the neighboring country. In 2021, Myanmar descended into a civil war. Myanmar's military regime did not allow for the elections to be completed. It declared the elections to be a fraud, suspended the government, brought in emergency, and brought back the rule of the military junta. Following this, a civil war broke out with all the political parties and pro democracy forces declaring a war against the military regime, and various ethnic armed groups in Myanmar have rebelled against the military state. This civil war has led to a serious humanitarian situation. Myanmar's military has been brutally targeting the opposition and the protesters and the armed groups, triggering a refugee crisis into India. Refugees like the Chins, who are connected and related to the Mizos on the Indian side, the Zomi refugees who are related to the Kuki community, they've all fled Myanmar and sought refuge in India, in Mizoram, in Manipur. Obviously, these communities are related, they share familial ties with them, they have to shelter them, protect them. So, though India has tried blocking the entry of refugees and illegal migrants, local communities have taken the refugees in and protected them because there is a humanitarian crisis which has perpetuated in Myanmar. And this is connected to what happened in 2023. The Zomi refugees who are sheltered by the Kukis, they are resisted by the Metis from Imphal. Why? I'll explain. According to the allegations of Metis and the then state government under Biren Singh, which allegedly was pro-Methi, the Zomi refugees with Kukis were basically encroaching on government land and forest land and clearing forests for drug cultivation and drug trafficking. While there is some truth to this, you can't buy the entire argument of the Biren Singh government and the Methi community that all Zomis and Kukis were cultivating drugs. Maybe some refugees would have spilled over, yes, 100%. They wouldn't have any other livelihood opportunity. Some would have been pushed towards drug cultivation because that's the only source of livelihood. For that, you can't blame the entire community, right? So, this political bias, the overall mismanagement of the scenario, and the persistent rivalries and divisions, it got quickly aggravated. The state government under then Chief Minister Biren Singh declared the clearing of the encroached land and got the Kuki encroachments and Zozomi encroachments cleared in the name of fighting a war against drug cultivation, and drug trafficking. While it is a serious concern, genuinely there is a drug problem, but targeting the entire community, clearing the land, the forest land that belonged to the Kukis, who had sheltered the Zozomi refugees, was seen as a direct attack on the Kuki-Zo minority. At the same time, the Biren Singh government ended the ceasefire agreement with the Kuki armed groups. Now, what message does this send? For many years, there was a suspension of operations agreement signed between Government of India, Government of Manipur, and the Kuki armed groups. That's the reason why Kuki armed groups had stopped their insurgency. There was a ceasefire in place. Suddenly, Biren Singh government suspends this agreement, ends the ceasefire agreement, which means Manipur police will now target the Kuki Zo community. So this further threatened the Kuki community, feeling that they felt that the state government is now going to target them. So upon this came a controversial judgment of the Manipur High Court. Since Nagas and Kukis have the ST status right from 1950s, Metis also have been demanding ST status from a long time, citing the lack of development, the backwardness, the limited land and resources they have. They also have been claiming the ST status. In 2013, the then Manmohan Singh government had even set up a committee under the Tribal Affairs Ministry to study the demand. This committee had recommended that ST status should be provided to Metis as well. This report was submitted to Government of Manipur and Government of India as well. But no action had been taken by the government. So Methi petitioners had approached the High Court asking for orders to be given for ST status to be provided. And in May 2023, the High Court passed this order. It directed the governments to consider whether ST status should be provided to the Methis. Please understand, High Court did not order ST status to be given because that's not the job of the High Court. The High Court directed the governments to consider the report of this committee to reevaluate whether Methis deserved ST status. So this push was given by the High Court. So the moment this ruling came out, immediately the Kukis got alarmed that now Methis are going to get reservation, that they will be on the same footing with same protection. And this triggered a series of protests and counter-protests. Kukis held a protest and rally against the grant of ST status. Methis countered this, and immediately the protest turned violent, with armed groups from both sides resorting to brutal violence. Methi insurgents like UNLF, PLA, Prepak, and other new entities, they brutally targeted Kuki Zo communities. Kuki armed groups with cross-border support from Zozomi community targeted Methis in the Imphal Valley. So massive violence broke out from Churchandpur to Imphal Valley, leading to hundreds of killings, thousands of injuries, lakhs of people displaced. And the central and state governments had failed. They had failed miserably in containing the situation. The allegations that Biren Singh government was biased, favoring the Methis for political points, it further added the misery and the suffering of the people. The center was too late to act. The MHA eventually brought in additional forces. It even took over the security situation, and it was still unable to contain the crisis. The violence continued into late 2024 for more than 1 year. And we also saw direct links between these extremist groups with Myanmar, where they were sourcing their arms, their weapons. There was even usage of drones, drop explosives. It was very new to Northeast India. Unarmed, unmanned aerial vehicles and these commercial toy drones were effectively used by the Kuki armed groups to drop explosives onto targets. A lot of rapes were reported, killings were reported. So things quickly escalated. Then satellite based communication devices were recovered by the security forces, which the insurgents were using. So large scale tit for tat attacks took place between both sides. The state suffered, people on all the sides suffered extensively. And eventually, the pressure built up on the state government. Biren Singh accepted responsibility and stepped down. And the state came under president's rule. Now, there has been some breakthrough Recently, PM Modi has visited Manipur finally. There was a lot of criticism against PM Modi for not visiting Manipur for almost 2 years. But PM Modi finally took the step, visited Manipur to deliver the healing touch, to instill confidence amongst the people. And there is some hope which is now being instilled because the government of India has restored the peace pact with the Kuki-Zo groups. The ceasefire agreement which Biren Singh had suspended, it has been restored by the center with Manipur being under president's rule. The suspension of operations agreement has been restored. This is a very new development. It happened just few weeks back, just last month in September. This was right ahead of the visit of PM Modi to create normalcy in Manipur. On one side, government had already struck a peace accord with UNLF, with Meitei insurgents. Now, the government has struck peace and restored the ceasefire with the Kuki-Zo Council, which is a coalition of the Kuki armed groups and the Kuki civil society. So with this, the government has shown some willingness to make concessions. Previously, Kuki-Zo Council was demanding statehood or union territory status or constitutional autonomy. Now, they will not settle anything less than statehood. This is what the Kuki-Zo Council has announced, that they have agreed to stop all the violence. But initially, they were demanding only union territory status or some constitutional autonomy under 6th schedule. But now they have said this is not enough. They have said 6th schedule status is not sufficient. They have said autonomy is not enough, and they want complete statehood to be granted. This is the new demand which has been raised by the Kuki-Zo Council. And in return, they have agreed to reopen a critical highway, NH2, that connects Imphal with Dimapur. This critical highway, which allegedly was blocked by these insurgents, which crippled Manipur. Because see, Manipur is linked with Nagaland and to rest of India through this crucial highway. It's essential to bring the vehicles, the trucks and goods and essential supplies. So if this highway is blocked, Manipur gets crippled. So the Imphal Dimapur highway, which was blocked by the Kuki insurgents, has been lifted. The blockade has been lifted. And the Prime Minister who visited Manipur has announced several investments and projects to restore confidence and bring back some normalcy. So hopefully, in some time, complete normalcy should come back. The government should address the demands of Meiteis as well, the Kuki-Zo community as well, ensure that the affected people are rehabilitated, compensated, and finally, a settlement should be brought out between the communities. The divisions have to be healed. The hatred which has developed should be addressed by the government, and eventually development has to be brought out. So it's a long-term process. This should pave the way for elections to be held. President rule should eventually be removed. Elections should be allowed to happen. So let's see what happens. It's still a developing story. This is what you need to know as far as Manipur is concerned. Now coming to Mizoram, then Tripura and Meghalaya. The last few topics left for today. Very small topics, we can cover this quickly. Mizoram and Tripura are two success stories for India. India has seen tremendous success in ending Mizo insurgency and the Tripuri insurgency. So it's a historical topic, only of historical relevance, but these are lessons in conflict management, in conflict resolution. So what is the story behind Mizo insurgency? Why did this start? See, today Mizoram is a separate state, correct? But after independence, it was just a district within Assam. Assam was a very large state that included Meghalaya, that included Nagaland, that included Manipur, and so Manipur was independent kingdom as a kingdom and as a Part C state, right? Then Mizoram was just one district within Assam. So the Mizo people belong to a distinct ethnic group. They are more connected with the Chin community in Myanmar on the other side of the border. They felt that Assamese were dominating over them. Right from independence, the Mizos, they were also hesitant to merge with India. But because of the British pressure tactics and the push by the Indian government as well, Mizos were forced to accept India's sovereignty and they were pushed to join the Indian Union. This was seen as a forceful merger, and they felt Indian government didn't care about the Mizo people as it was a very distant, faraway region, geographically isolated. They felt Assamese were dominating over them. They felt government of Assam didn't care about them. See, this was because the Mizo language also faced discrimination. Just like Bodo language was discriminated over Assamese, Mizo language was not recognized, not given the same treatment and respect. So this became a question of linguistic identity, tribal identity. They felt the government of Assam was dominated by Assamese. It cared only about the Assamese who were in majority, and minority Mizos were not given the same preference and priority. This suspicion came true in 1950s, in late 1950s. The Mizo region suffered a grave disaster, suffered from a famine triggered by a season known as the Motham season. You know, in Northeast India, bamboo is a major part of the vegetation. It is cultivated as well. It has a lot of application, right? In the industry, in farming, even as a food item. Bamboo has a lot of application and it's quite essential to Northeastern economy. Now, these bamboo plants, right, as you call it, they flower essentially in a cyclical manner. There's an ecological cycle, a 48-year-old cycle. It repeats every 48 years. There is a mass flowering of the bamboo shoots that occurs once in 48 years. It's called the Motham season. Now, when the bamboo flowers and the seeds fall to the ground, there is an abundant supply of food which feeds the rodents. Because of the abundant seeds available, there is an explosion in the population of rats and rodents. They will feed on the seeds, but once the flowering season ends, by then rodent population would have exploded. So they will go in search of food. They will destroy the standing crops. They will attack the warehouses, the granaries where the food is stored. And this triggers a artificial famine, a rodent triggered famine. See, today this doesn't happen because there is better pest management, pest control. But back then in 1958-59, the required support was not there. So during the Motham season, the flowering season of bamboo, there was an explosion in rodent population. And after that, the rodents destroyed the crops and they destroyed the food warehouses and the granaries, triggering a massive famine and food shortage. Mizors were dying out of hunger and famine, and allegedly government of Assam did not do enough. That's what the Mizos felt. The Mizos perceived that government of Assam was not coming to their rescue. Government of India was not doing enough. So the Mizos looked after their own interests. The Mizo National Front took shape later. It was the Mizo Union. Initially, the Mizo Union arranged the disaster support, the famine support. There was a legendary leader, Pu Laldenga. Under the leadership of Pu Laldenga, the Mizo community, through the Mizo Union as a political union, organized their own relief efforts without depending much on the government of Assam and government of India. So following this, the Mizos were convinced, especially Pu Laldenga, who was formerly with the Indian Army. He was a Havaldar with the Indian Army. He was convinced that Mizos have no future with India. They have no future with Assam. And he launched the Mizo National Front as a violent extremist separatist movement to break Mizoram, the Mizo region, from India itself. And immediately, the Mizo National Front and its armed outfit, the Mizo National Army, got complete support from Pakistan via East Pakistan. So in 1960s, Pakistan waged this covert war by supporting Pu Laldenga, by giving them funds, arms, weapons, and military training and safe havens in East Pakistan, through which the MNF targeted India. Large scale attacks were taking place. So India responded by declaring the area as a disturbed area, and AFSPA was introduced. And with these special powers, the Indian Armed Forces and Assam Rifles, they started large scale counter-insurgency operations to dismantle the MNF. This is where there is a controversial piece of history, a story which remained covert, which remained classified for many, many years, a story which was denied by the Indian government for many years. The only instance where India bombed its own territory, its own people, similar to how recently Pakistan has bombed Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a similar fashion, Indian Air Force was used by then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi to target the MNF. Bombings were carried out, air strikes were carried out in Aswal, in populated urban centers. The year was 1966. Hundreds of people were killed. The government later justified the operation, though it remained covert for a long time. It remained classified. Eventually, when it became public, the government justified the operation, saying it was necessary to break the insurgents because they were having cross border support from Pakistan. But it raises the question, can the government use armed forces, conduct airstrikes on its own territory, on its own people? So this remains a ethical dilemma. Now, for example, if you look at our fight against Naxalism, government has made a conscious choice not to use armed forces against Naxals because using army or air force against Naxalism would create a new problem. It would lead to human right abuses, large scale violations and killings, which could create more resentment and anger, which could further the conflict. Only in specific areas like Northeast India, Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Indian armed forces have been used selectively. To deal with Khalistan movement for specific operations, Indian armed forces were used, like Operation Blue Star. In Northeast India, to tackle the insurgent threat, Indian Army has been used. Indian Air Force has been used once. Jammu and Kashmir, as you know, Indian Army has been used in counter-terrorist operations. That's because these are border states, unlike Naxal-affected areas. This is where cross-border support is present from Pakistan, from China. So, given the greater threat, the grave, serious security threat for our security integrity, the cross-border support, in special circumstances, India has used armed forces against insurgencies, against its own people. But a conscious choice has been made not to use armed forces against Naxalism. Is that clear? Now, this is one instance where India bombed its own territory. But following this, the group was decimated. By 1970s, the group was almost dismantled, and especially after Bangladesh was liberated by India. After 1971, we got full support from Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to dismantle the Mizo safe havens and the terror networks that existed. So as a result, the MNF surrendered. Initially, Mizo demands were met by elevating the status to a union territory. It was carved out of Assam in 72, made a union territory. Then India opened talks with the MNF, with Pu Lal Denga. And finally, in 1986, Mizo Peace Accord was worked out. Look at India's approach. Though hard power was used, military power was employed to crush the movement. When the time was right, when the group was breaking up and about to surrender, India showed the willingness to talk and engage in negotiation and even made concessions. That explains why India is not a brutal state unlike other countries. We have never used brutal, mindless force and violence to crush internal problems. To some extent, yes, force becomes necessary to deal with security threats. But beyond a point, once you achieve your objective of weakening these outfits, when government is holding the leverage and the bargaining power, India has shown the willingness to talk, to negotiate and find a political settlement, even making concessions to meet the genuine aspirations and demands of the people. So through the peace agreement, India established Mizoram as a state. Statehood was granted to the Mizo Peace Accord. And more importantly, MNF was allowed into mainstream politics. Can you believe that? A former insurgent group was not only allowed to surrender, but it was allowed to come back into mainstream politics. Pu Lal Denga would even go on to become the chief minister of Mizoram, a former insurgent, a former wanted wanted criminal as far as India was concerned, with support from Pakistan. After surrender, was allowed to enter mainstream politics, and when Mizoram attained statehood, it was Pu Lal Denga who formed the state government and became the chief minister of the new state. So this is how India successfully ended the Mizo insurgency. This is a success story for India. This basically tells you what is the approach of India. When it comes to conflict resolution, we have this multi-pronged approach, using security measures when necessary and needed, using the hard security power, the military power when necessary, showing the willingness to talk, focusing on development, focusing on intelligence, focusing on managing the narrative, countering the propaganda of the extremists. So it's a mixed, combined effort. Focus on border security to curb the cross border support. With these measures, we have managed to stabilize Northeast India today. Coming to Tripura, even in Tripura, you find a similar success story of India. The insurgency in Tripura dates back to 1970s, and the root cause is very easy to understand. I don't have to explain this again. It's exactly the same root cause as that of Ulfa's insurgency in Assam. The influx of illegal migrants from Bangladesh has been the root problem. Tripura shares a border with Bangladesh. The Tripuri community, the native tribal community, right? The then Tripuri kingdom, dominated by the Tripuris, they have felt threatened by the Bengali migration, the flow of refugees during partition, during Pakistan's atrocities in 1771, then the constant flow of illegal migrants has threatened the Tripuris. It has pushed them away from Agartala. It has pushed them away from the plains and pushed them into the hill areas. This became a threat for their survival, for their land, their language, their resources, their identity. And that pushed radical Tripuris to start their own insurgency. So major Tripuri insurgent groups were NLFT and ATTF, all Tripura Tiger Force and the National Liberation Front of Tripura. So from 1970s to 1990s, for almost 2 decades, roughly 20 years, these Tripuri insurgent groups posed a serious threat. Their demand was separatism. They wanted to break Tripura from India to form a separate country for Tripuris, right? But India tackled this problem with great tact and effectiveness. The state government gets most of the credit. The then legendary leader of Tripura, right, Manik Sarkar, the communist government did a phenomenal job at bringing grassroots development, addressing the ground level issues, while the center focused on the security operations and intelligence gathering and perception management. So it was a combined strategy which gave successful results for India again. On one hand, we waged a psychological warfare to weaken the insurgent groups, to weaken the cross border support, improved border security. Parallelly, we engaged the media, focused on local development, and this allowed the government to get the support of the local community and reduce the support for the insurgents. It was this combined effort that reduced the overall support for Tripuri insurgency, and it eventually became a dormant movement by 1990s. There has been no formal peace accord, but these groups have largely become extinct of sorts. And Tripura, by the way, became the first state in Northeast India to revoke AFSPA completely. Recently, in 2015, the Tripura State Assembly passed a resolution revoking the declaration of Tripura as a disturbed area, thus leading the center to revoke the imposition of AFSPA. And Tripura became the first state in Northeast India to do that. Tripura is again a successful model, a state which has succeeded in defeating insurgency and resolving it through a multi-pronged approach. Now, coming to the last state, Meghalaya, a key topic again. Meghalaya also has seen its own version of insurgency. There are two factors which have played a role in Meghalaya. One is the illegal migration factor, just like Assam, just like Tripura, illegal migration from East Pakistan and from Bangladesh. Then there is a lot of inter-tribal rivalry as well. These two factors have played a role in the insurgency that Meghalaya has experienced from 1980s onwards. And there are still few groups that are active in Meghalaya even today. So let's quickly understand this. Meghalaya eventually became a state in 1972 during the reorganization of Northeast India, right? Previously, it was part of the larger state of Assam. Briefly, it was an autonomous state for a couple of years. Then finally, it was granted full statehood. Now, if you look at Meghalaya, the demography again is very unique. There are multiple hill-dwelling tribes, native tribal groups that are present. Now look at the map here. I want you to understand this point very clearly. Towards the western part of Meghalaya, where you have the Garo Hills, this is where you find the Garo community, correct? Facing Bangladesh on the other side. There are three major hill ranges, Garo, Kasi, Jaintia, arranged in a west-east direction, right? Facing the Bangladeshi border on the other side. Towards western Meghalaya over here, along the border with East Pakistan and Bangladesh, you have the Garo Hills. This is where you find the Garo community, also known as the Achiks. Garos are also known as Achiks. They belong to the Indo-Tibetan Burman race, a very distinct race found over here. Then you have central and western Meghalaya, which covers and comprises your Kasi Hill region, Jaintia Hill region. This is where you find a collective ethnic group called the Hainif-Trep. Here you find the Hainif-Trep people, which is a collective term that refers to Kasi, Jaintia, Boy, and other war tribes that you find in central and eastern Meghalaya. They are of Proto-Australoid Monk Khmer race, a very distinct race, tracing linkages to East Asia, Southeast Asia. Whereas the Garo Achiks, they trace linkages to the Tibetan Burman heritage. Now, these hill tribes present along the borders with East Pakistan, Bangladesh, they obviously were affected by illegal migration. Even when Meghalaya was part of Assam, the large scale influx of refugees and then Bengali illegal migrants from Bangladesh, it had a serious impact on the local demography, the access to tribal land and resources of the Garo, Kasi, Jaintia community. So, united together, they launched an insurgent war to target these illegal migrants and to oppose the Indian state and to break away these regions to form a separate country for themselves. These were separatist movements essentially. But there have been instances of inter-tribal rivalry between Achiks and Hainif Treps, between Garos on one side, Kasi, Jaintia, and the others on the other side. So there is a history of conflict between these elements. Even here, there were allegations of manipulation of voters' list, with illegal migrants from Bangladesh being included in the voters' list, that triggered the anger of the Garo Achiks and the Hainif Trep people. Is that clear? And also, experts believe the underdevelopment in this region, in the tribal belt of Garo, Kasi, Jaintia, the lack of opportunities, lack of education, the frustration amongst the youth has also contributed to the resentment and the anger, which quickly turns into insurgency. So, all these factors have played a role. So, at one point, there were different groups operating over here. Hainif Trep National Liberation Council, HNLC, Achik National Volunteer Council, and People's Liberation Front of Meghalaya. These were the different armed insurgent groups that were operating at one point. Sometimes there is a history of violence between Garo Achiks and the Hainif Trep Kasis as well. HNLC has been the most dominant and dangerous group. So India has tried to weaken these outfits. We have not only targeted these groups with counterinsurgency operations, but India has improved border security as well. We have addressed some of the local demands. And don't forget, sixth schedule autonomy has been provided by establishing autonomous district councils in Garo Hills, in Kasi, and as well as in Jaintia Hills. All three hill areas here, the tribal belt, enjoy constitutional protection by establishing autonomous district councils under Article 244. So you can see how the government has made concessions, showing flexibility, but parallelly we have targeted the groups trying to weaken them. So by 1990s, these groups were largely weakened. Government has tried negotiating with them. We have even employed local community leaders and the church as well to act as a mediator. The government has actively involved local community leaders, including the church, to negotiate with the armed groups. And today, Garo Achik insurgency has almost died out. Even Jaintia insurgency has almost died out. But the Hainif Trep, the HNLC outfit, remains active even today. It's a minor threat. It's not a very serious threat for India, but it remains active in the region. It has linkages with other insurgent groups. It has cross-border linkages as well. So HNLC remains a concern, but India has been making peace efforts, reaching out to all these groups to talk to them, negotiate with them, and to end the conflict forever. Recently, there was a development. The ongoing peace talks with HNLC has ended because HNLC has quit the peace process and it continues to remain active against India. Though it's a minor challenge, you should still note down this point. Remember this. The Garo Achik groups have largely ended their insurgency. Jaintia insurgency also has died out, but the Kasi groups under the Heiniftrep label, especially HNLC, remains a major concern. It has quit the talks recently, the peace process which is going on. It has exited the peace process and it continues to target outsiders and tourists. You might have heard in Meghalaya, every now and then there is a boycott or there is a band which is imposed. Tourists are also targeted. That is done by HNLC, which remains an active group on the ground. See, these groups are mainly criminal organizations today. In the name of separatism, in the name of insurgency, they are basically running their criminal networks. They are carrying out extortion. They are controlling the businesses, controlling land, resorting to drug and arms trafficking. That's how they are making money. And for survival, they are using insurgency as an excuse, as if they are fighting for their community. But most of these insurgent groups are hypocrites. Understood? So India is trying to deal with the remnants in Meghalaya to end the remnants of the insurgent groups forever. Now, this brings me to the last point for today. What is the overall response of the Indian state? How do you summarize India's response to deal with Northeast insurgency? What if UPSC will ask you one comprehensive question? Instead of asking specific questions on Naga insurgency or Ulfa or Bodo or Meghalaya's insurgency, what if there is a broad question on all insurgencies of Northeast India, why the region is vulnerable? What has been the standard response of India? How will you write your answer? How will you summarize your points? I've given you 5 ready-made points based on what we've discussed today. First and foremost, India's response has always relied on proportionate use of force. India has usually not used disproportionate force, except for few human right violations which have been alleged under AFSPA, except for that one airstrike in Aswal in 1966. Apart from that, India in general has stayed away from disproportionate use of force. Our counter-insurgency operations under AFSPA have been measured. It has been designed to cater to the security situation, to deal with these threats and to dismantle these organizations. Instead, we are focused on improving border security, working with our neighbors like Myanmar and Bangladesh to get their support to bring down these entities. Our coin operations are intelligence based operations, targeted precision operations. So we have stayed away from massive and blatant use of force or disproportionate use of force. This is point number one, meaning the state has shown lot of restraint. The state has tried to curb itself because we don't want unnecessary violations to happen. We don't want the local people to suffer. So we deal only with the extremists by using the basic minimum approaches that are needed, by using our security forces, our intelligence agencies. And once we weaken the groups, once we break their safe havens, their funding, once we arrest the top leaders, in immediately India has shown the willingness to talk and negotiate peace accords. You tell me, what was the need to negotiate peace accord with MNF? India could have simply crushed the outfit. We could have crushed NSCN, ULFA and NDFB and other groups, but India has not done that. The goal is to weaken them through targeted operations, push them to talk, hold the leverage in the bargaining chips, and ensure that you give some concession to meet the genuine aspiration of the people. Develop the region, provide some benefits within the ambit of the constitution, and then in turn force them to surrender. This will permanently end the conflict. The reason why Mizo insurgency has not returned is because India negotiated a political settlement. The reason why Bodo Accord is a success is because a political settlement was worked out. This shows the structural use, the constitutional flexibility that we have employed, the sixth schedule provisions, how Article 371 grants special provisions for these regions from Article 371A and the entire series of articles provides a degree of special protection to Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, Nagaland, and Mizoram. This has helped India to work out a flexible structure within the ambit of the constitution. Without giving them independence, without fulfilling the separatist demand, we have been able to contain the demand and provide that autonomy, thereby providing for tribal rights and tribal welfare as well. That balance has been struck by India by using the flexibility of the Indian constitution. And don't forget the focus on development. Look at the kind of projects India is executing today in the Northeast. Today, you have a dedicated ministry for development of Northeast India, dedicated welfare schemes with increased funding for Northeastern states. Hydropower projects are being set up, road, railway projects are coming up. We are bypassing our weakness at Siliguri by working out alternate connectivity routes via Bangladesh and Myanmar. You might have heard of Kaladan multimodal transit transport corridor. You might have heard about our connectivity projects with Bangladesh, linking with Bangladeshi ports and river networks and Bangladeshi roads and railway lines to connect rest of India with Northeast India. This has been a vision of India under the Look East, Act East policy of India. So we are using Northeast India as a gateway to engage with Southeast and East Asia. Northeast India is critical to connect with Myanmar because that is a bridge linking India with Southeast and East Asia, which is a focus of Look East, Act East policy. We have drawn investments to Northeast India through Look East, Act East policy from Japan, Singapore, and others. We want to create a market for Northeastern products in Southeast Asia and East Asia and bring investments from those countries into Northeast India to drive development. Our projects with Bhutan, the Gelugfu Mindfulness City project, the airport India is building at Gelugfu, the railway links India is creating with Bhutan, they create new opportunities for Northeast India, the youth in the Northeast part of the country. India is developing large industrial projects. In Tripura, there is a town called Sabroom. India is trying to turn Sabroom in Tripura into a major industrial corridor, which can connect Northeast India with Southeast Asian markets. So such mega initiatives have been conceptualized to bring development. Our foreign policy is also striving to bring that development because addressing developmental issues is one way to tackle extremism and radicalism. Please understand this concept. When you don't develop an area, when there is maladministration, misgovernance, when there is injustice which is done or a perceived sense of injustice, it will always breed resentment which can be exploited by radical extremists. It will become a fertile ground for extremism against the state. And vice versa is also true. One way to counter extremism, radicalism is to provide for better development, better opportunities. So this is what India has been doing. And honestly, today we are in a much, much better position as far as Northeast insurgency is concerned. India has done a phenomenal job at tackling these threats. Though the threat persists and remains, India has done pretty well over the decades. And today, Northeast India is relatively stable apart from the minor issues which are present. So, with this, I bring my discussion to an end. It's been exactly 3 hours since we started. I hope it's been a useful, interesting discussion. Now, at the end, I've given you all the PYQs and some practice questions for you to practice your answer writing. Please take a look at the PYQs. Look at this question asked in 2014. Question on illegal transborder migration. It refers to illegal migration from Bangladesh. How it has affected India's security situation. It's not specific to Northeast India, but you can plug Northeast India, the illegal migration threat from Bangladesh, how it has triggered insurgencies in Meghalaya, in Assam, in Tripura. Right? So that should be the focus of your answer. Look at this question on AFSPA. The controversy surrounding AFSPA, the human right violations which are alleged under it. So we discussed this topic as well. This was specific to Northeast India. The region is infested with insurgency from a very long time. Analyze the reasons why it has survived for such a long time. This was the first topic we spoke about today. The scourge of terrorism is a grave challenge to national security. Now see, in this question, you can plug Northeast insurgency because groups like NSCN, NDFB, ULFA, they've all been designated by India as terrorist organizations under UAPA, under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Though technically they are insurgent organizations, Government of India, the Home Ministry, has designated all the Northeast insurgent groups as terrorist entities, as prohibited unlawful organizations under the provisions of UAPA, which is our primary anti-terror law. So while you talk about the scourge of terrorism, which includes state-sponsored terrorism, religion-based radical extremism-based terrorism, you can plug in Northeast insurgency and terrorism as well. Then this question is related to India's proximity to opium growing states. It's a reference to Golden Triangle, Golden Crescent, how it impacts our security situation. Question related to border security, border management, with links to Northeast insurgency. There was this question again specifically on Northeast India. Then how the challenges on India-Myanmar border has affected the security situation in the Northeast. Remember, we spoke about the cross-border linkages, how criminal networks in Myanmar and Golden Triangle can help Northeast insurgents, how it has spilled over across the porous border. So that is the topic that you need to discuss. Then the role of state, non-state actors, the linkages between them to create security challenges for India. So here you can bring the argument of Northeast insurgent groups, how they have got support in Bangladesh and Myanmar from hostile governments, even from Pakistan and China, how the state actors have supported non-state actors against India. This question on the connection between organized crime and terrorism. Again, you can plug in the example of Northeast insurgent groups. So these are some PYQs that were asked. There were a few more questions, but I think this should be enough for your practice. Now, apart from this, I've given some questions of my own. There are 6 questions I've added in the PPT. Please pause the screen, take down the questions, and use them to practice your answer writing. What I would suggest is, it's been one marathon session. I know we've discussed a lot of things. Even you must have been a little overwhelmed, but I've tried simplifying it as much as possible with detailed notes given in the PPT. So later, what you do is maybe tomorrow, sit for some more time and revise everything once. It'll hardly take you 1.5 hours to revise what we have studied. And I'm hoping you have made some running notes. So quickly revise once and then take these questions one by one to practice your answer writing. So these are the 6 questions I'm giving you, bonus additional questions. So you can use them throughout the year to practice your answer writing. So with this, I can confidently tell you that we have covered this chapter almost in its entirety with the current recent developments. So it's been one stop solution for you, a one shot marathon covering this complex chapter on Northeast insurgency. I hope it's been really useful. If you like the session, do let me know by pressing the like button. Share your comments. We need more and more support from you to bring such initiatives, to put in that extra effort to take these marathon classes, to bring you the best quality content, which we have promised. So do support us by sharing the videos as well with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.